Rio awoke surrounded by clouds, standing before an angel named Michael. The angel informed him that he had recently died but would not be heading to the afterlife yet. Michael explained that Rio had become another victim of the infamous truck and that he would be sent to a new world for a fresh life. Michael stated that Rio would not be given any special mission or grand objective and was free to live as he pleased. When Rio expressed a desire for a peaceful life, Michael agreed. Before sending him off, Michael provided an overview of the new world, named Fee, a magical land where about 20% of the population could use spells tied to their elemental affinity. Michael identified Rio's strongest affinity as water. Since Rio had asked for a peaceful life, Michael revealed he had prepared a cozy house for him as a starter kit, which included 2 tutorial books, a knife, and a protective barrier to keep monsters away. He also mentioned stocking an ice house with 2 months of food and providing a guidebook on local monsters. Rio, focused on testing his new magic, stepped outside. He shouted an incantation and successfully formed a sphere of water in his hand. He discovered magic was simpler than he imagined. He could cast the spell through visualization alone, without verbal incantations. After confirming his abilities, he headed to the bathhouse to fill a tub but realized he only knew how to produce cold water. He unsuccessfully tried to build a fire manually. Lying defeated, he looked at the sun and had an idea. He filled a basin with water, focused on compressing and drawing heat from it, and formed ice. He shaped the ice into a magnifying glass, used it to start a fire, and finally heated his bathwater. By the end of his first day, he enjoyed a proper soak. Rio reasoned that if he could remove heat to make ice, he should be able to add heat to create warm water, setting this as his next goal. The following morning, he considered his dwindling food supply and resolved to hunt, doubting a mere knife would suffice against forest monsters. He decided to practice attack magic. His first attempt, launching a water ball at a tree, succeeded but was ineffective for combat. He remembered a way to increase the water's force by compressing it into a focused jet, but his control was insufficient, resulting in a weak stream. Rio recalled Michael's advice that magic relied heavily on imagination and required practice to refine. After several days of training, Rio's water jets improved but remained too weak for hunting. He had, however, learned to produce hot water for baths, though temperature control was still imperfect. The next morning, he practiced conjuring ice directly from the air, a difficult task that took 3 minutes. He succeeded but found he could not launch the ice easily. Combat training was proving challenging. After pushing himself to mana depletion, he collapsed. The next morning, he resumed training, a routine that continued for weeks. His hard work paid off. He could now create ice instantly as a reliable offensive spell. With his food supply running low and his new attack magic ready, he ventured into the forest to hunt. He followed animal tracks to a river, where he collected quartz for fire starting and detox herbs. Suddenly, a deep growl startled him. He turned to face a lesser boar and froze in panic during his first life-or-death battle. At the last second, he dodged the charge. As the boar turned to attack again, Rio cleared his mind, created an icy path to make it slip, and summoned ice spikes in its path, killing it instantly. After butchering the boar, Rio consulted his guidebook and learned it was the forest's weakest monster. Toward the end of the book, he found 2 notable pages. One described immensely powerful dragons, advising immediate flight, as confrontation was hopeless. Another page mentioned mysterious beings called Akuma, a type of fallen angel, about which little was known. The book's only advice for an encounter was that it meant certain death. The following day, while hunting, a giant assassin hawk launched a surprise attack from above, using wind magic. Rio ran, summoning ice shields to block the wind blades. Knowing escape was impossible, he stood his ground. He launched water jets, which the hawk evaded before diving at him. Rio reacted just in time, forming an ice shield that cut the hawk across the eye and sent it crashing down. The hawk, having permanently lost one eye, retreated into the sky but locked eyes with Rio one last time as if to remember him. Rio sighed in relief, though this was far from the peaceful life he had imagined. During the chase, he had become lost deep in the forest. Wandering at night, he stumbled upon a glowing lake where a Dullahan stood, and it had already noticed him. Over time, Rio honed his skills through relentless training, mastering hunting and food preservation. His water magic grew significantly more powerful. He could conjure razor-sharp ice sheets and launch potent water jets that could slice through stone. His combat prowess had become formidable. He had also been practicing nightly battles with the Dullahan since their first encounter. The monster guidebook never mentioned Dullahans, suggesting they were not classified as monsters or were too advanced for a beginner's manual. Rio treated these encounters as training sessions, though the Dullahan overwhelmingly outmatched him in power and technique. Despite his efforts with ice shields, he was quickly defeated each time. Rio felt the Dullahan had taken on a mentor's role, trying to mold him into something stronger. One day, the Dullahan lifted its sword, channeled water magic to lengthen the blade, revealing it could use water magic, and after demonstrating the technique, handed the sword to Rio before calmly stepping onto the lake. Later, while hunting, Rio was ambushed by the same assassin hawk, which had evolved, its feathers now black, seeking vengeance. The hawk unleashed a barrage of powerful wind slashes. Rio conjured 5 layers of ice walls, but the evolved hawk shattered them instantly. A wave of anxiety crept over him as he sprinted, throwing up more ice walls for cover. He fired volleys of ice spikes, but the hawk evaded them with a sudden burst of speed. The hawk then let out a piercing screech that disrupted Rio's magic, causing his shields to vanish. Sensing a major attack, Rio felt electricity in the air and dodged a lightning bolt by using a stick as a lightning rod. As he shook off the shock, the hawk swooped down for a fatal strike. Rio summoned an ice blade at the last moment to deflect it. They exchanged several blows until Rio, remembering his training with the Dullahan, spotted an opening and drove his sword through the hawk's neck. As the hawk crashed down, Rio walked toward it with a sense of understanding. He knew the hawk had lost an eye because of him and had since driven itself to evolve and prove its strength. But Rio had also worked hard to grow stronger, and in the end, he was victorious. Afterward, Rio started home but was surprised by the sudden appearance of a dragon. Remembering the guidebook's warnings, he thought it was the end. However, the dragon spoke to him telepathically without aggression, explaining it was just passing through, searching for a black hawk. Relieved, Rio realized it meant the hawk he had just defeated. He nervously apologized, explaining the hawk had attacked first, leaving him no choice. The dragon was shocked a human like Rio could defeat such a creature but was not bothered. Instead, its attention was caught by Rio's sword, which it recognized as the Fairy King's blade. The dragon, growing fond of Rio, spent several hours chatting with him into the evening until it had to return home. They parted with a warm farewell. Meanwhile, in heaven, Michael reviewed Rio's reincarnation documents and discovered he had previously overlooked a hidden trait, eternal youth. Michael found this unusual, noting he hadn't seen such a trait since sending a girl to that world 10,000 years prior. Rio later went to the beach craving seafood and was shocked to find a giant shipwreck and a dead body. He then heard a grunt and found a survivor named Abel, who remembered the ship being destroyed by a sea monster. Abel was surprised to be alive and grateful to Rio for bringing him to safety. Rio shared the sad news that no one else had survived. Abel revealed they had all been smugglers, which shocked Rio. Abel's stomach growled, and Rio invited him to lunch. During the meal, Abel learned Rio owned no clothes and had no money, surviving by hunting with water magic. Abel was impressed, noting that even in the central provinces, only about half the population could use magic, and he himself could not. Rio remembered Michael's figure of 20% but mumbled to himself. Abel asked Rio to take him to the coast to confirm something. On the way, Abel asked if Rio needed a magic staff, assuming he was too poor to afford one. He insisted that if they ran into trouble, he should take the front line to repay the debt. Rio reluctantly agreed. At the shore, they found the bodies were gone, likely taken by monsters or the tide. Abel reflected that he would have met the same fate if not for Rio and expressed his gratitude. Rio remarked on Abel's luck, and Abel agreed. Abel then mentioned it felt odd for his savior to call him Mr. and asked Rio to use his name instead, which made Abel happy as friends addressed him that way. Rio was surprised Abel considered him a friend. Abel explained he needed to find his friends and that the first step was reaching the town of Lon, which he believed lay to the north across the island. Abel recruited Rio as his guide, and Rio agreed on the condition of having a day to prepare. Rio realized his dream of a slow life was on hold. That night, Rio told Abel he needed to bid farewell to someone available only at that time. Abel, remembering Rio had said no one else lived around, assumed he wished to pay respects to a grave. Rio went to bid farewell to the Dullahan, thanking it for the training that enabled his survival. For their last sparring session, Rio used all his power, but the Dullahan easily deflected his attacks, leaving him exhausted. Before leaving, the Dullahan gifted Rio new clothes, which made him very happy. The next day, they began their journey. Rio wore his new outfit, which fit perfectly. They soon encountered a lesser boar. Abel told Rio to stand back and observe. He charged, activated a combat skill called Total Impalement, and killed the boar instantly, impressing Rio. The next morning, they resumed their journey and heard a sound, noticing two lizard folk in a marsh. They decided to take another route but sensed the lizard folk were following them. With no choice but to fight, Rio told Abel there were many, so he would use his magic. Abel reminded him he lacked a staff, but Rio simply chanted a spell and killed them all with icicles, shocking Abel. Together, they defeated all the lizard folk. After the fight, Abel noted that wind magicians he knew could only cast a single spell per invocation, and Rio suggested it might be different for water magic. Before resuming, Rio summoned water for them to drink. Abel noticed Rio used a different incantation, making Rio nervous, so he quickly changed the subject. After walking further, Abel gave Rio a coin, his first time seeing the world's currency. Abel explained it was a bronze florin used in the kingdom of Nightly, where Lon was located. He detailed that the central provinces minted their own coins but used the same denominations, with Nightly being one of three major nations alongside the Duhi Empire and the Handalu Federation. Rio found the name Duhi strange, and Abel wondered if he had a problem with the nation. Rio clarified he just found the name unusual, joking he wouldn't like to introduce himself as being from Duhi. Abel thought he was overthinking it. Later, they exited the forest. As they walked, Abel noticed a rock moving and prepared to attack, but Rio created an ice wall to block it. Abel noted they were surrounded in a rock golem's nest. Rio was surprised, having thought golems were humanoid. Abel charged forward, but his total impalement attack had no effect as the golem quickly regenerated. Rio said he had an attack to try. He created 10 layers of joined ice walls and dropped them over a golem to immobilize it. Abel was shocked by such powerful magic. Rio casually mentioned he had only taken out 2 golems and planned to do the same with the rest. Soon, only one immobile golem remained. Rio theorized they drew energy from the ground and, since it was flipped over, it couldn't. Abel then noticed a large magic stone attached to its bottom, which made him happy, though he wished he could collect stones from the others as well. On their way, the duo noticed a giant sleeping hippo, which Abel identified as a behemoth. Suddenly, several wyverns approached, and Rio was excited to witness a monster battle. As the wyverns attacked, the behemoth awoke and let out a loud screech that knocked them out. Rio explained it used magic negation. That night by a campfire, Rio joked about wanting to see Abel fight the behemoth, but Abel refused. Abel mentioned he'd heard of similar magic negation traps in dungeons but had never seen it before. The word dungeon excited Rio. Abel explained there was only one dungeon in the central provinces, luckily located in the town they were headed to. Rio jokingly asked why Abel had hidden this information, prompting a defensive reply. Rio continued teasing, asking if Abel had kept more secrets. Abel then asked if Rio knew about elves and dwarfs. Rio said he did not, so Abel informed him that dwarfs were skilled smiths and fighters, with a few in Lon. He added that only one elf lived in Lon, with the rest settled in woods they never left. Rio said this matched how he had pictured them, but Abel didn't believe him since Rio had never been off the island. The next day, Rio led the way, revealing that a human settlement lay across the mountain. Abel wondered how he knew this. Rio recalled the dragon had told him everything but said it was better if Abel didn't know, calling his source of knowledge beyond humankind. As they walked, they sensed something approaching from behind. A giant griffin appeared, leaving Abel frozen in fear. Rio quickly took meat from his sack, threw it into the air, and the griffin grabbed it before flying away. Both were relieved. Abel noted he had been completely stunned, while Rio admitted they might not have survived a fight. Abel remarked that humans weren't built to fight such monsters and that there were few reports of behemoth or griffin encounters for centuries, suggesting something was wrong with the area. Rio found this rude, thinking maybe humans weren't looking hard enough. Abel theorized the frozen mountains had kept these creatures out of human territory. As they walked, Rio remembered the wyverns that attacked the behemoth had come from the direction they were traveling. Soon, they spotted wyverns feeding. Abel stated they couldn't fight them, as it usually took 20 experienced adventurers to take down one, often with casualties. Rio reasoned that even if they tried to avoid them, they would likely encounter more and couldn't avoid fighting forever. He wondered if it would be easier to fight them on the ground, and Abel agreed, thinking he could use his sword more effectively. Rio stepped forward, summoning several ice spikes to stab the wyverns, and Abel followed up with his total impalement technique. The wyvern screams attracted more of their kind. Rio used an ice attack from above to bring them down, and Abel finished them off. After the battle, they collected magic stones. Abel admitted he couldn't believe how easy it was, while Rio wondered if Abel had hoped for a life-and-death battle for excitement. Just then, another flock approached. They prepared to fight, knowing they had to defeat them to keep moving. After success, they reached the mountain top and were overjoyed to see a human settlement on the other side. After defeating so many wyverns, Rio felt confident, stating he wouldn't mind encountering more. Abel found this ridiculous, preferring to never see the dangerous creatures again. Abel noted their surprising haul of magic stones but stopped talking, realizing they had traveled quite far north. Though Abel was clueless about their exact location, Rio nervously hoped they hadn't entered the Duhi Empire. Abel quickly reassured him they hadn't, as the Empire was farther north. Rio was relieved, and Abel grew curious about his apparent hatred for the place. Rio explained he had nothing personal against the Empire but simply disliked the name, which Abel found odd. Just then, Rio noticed a road cutting east to west through the landscape. Abel recognized the area and explained that following the road west would lead to the town of Killardy. Rio was excited at the prospect of sleeping in a proper bed, but Abel thought Rio wanted to fight more wyverns. Rio clarified those were two different things. Abel mentioned the food in Killardy was delicious, making Rio even more excited to visit. A while later, they arrived in Killardy and headed to a tavern. Abel suggested Rio register with the Adventurers Guild, but Rio had no idea what that meant. Abel explained that guild registration would serve as identification, allowing entry into towns without fees. He mentioned he had acted as Rio's guarantor and paid a silver coin as an entry fee. Rio jokingly asked if this was a sneaky plan to make him a servant. Abel kept trying to convince him, explaining they could sell magic stones and monster materials there for a good price, otherwise, Rio would have to become an alchemist to use them, which would be a hassle. Rio was surprised alchemy existed in this world and was further shocked when the waiter brought a plate of curry rice. He thought to himself that in most stories, the protagonist had to travel to find curry, but it already existed here. Abel asked what he was mumbling about, and Rio said it was nothing. He took a bite and found it so tasty he devoured it in seconds, ordering another plate. He asked if Lon had curry like this, and Abel confirmed they did, glad Rio enjoyed it. As they left town, Rio continued praising the curry and asked Abel to reveal the best desserts in town. Abel was caught off guard and said he'd think about it. They continued their journey and, after a few days, saw the town of Lon from a distance. At the city gates, a guard recognized Abel, saying everyone had been worried during his months of absence. Abel explained he had returned safely thanks to Rio. The guard excitedly shook Rio's hand in gratitude. Abel paid the entry fee again as his guarantor. The guard asked if they would head straight to the guild, mentioning Abel's friends were out of town but would be shocked to see him upon return. Inside the city, Abel suggested heading to the guild to register Rio as an adventurer, as he could help him rank up. Rio asked what that meant. Abel explained new adventurers usually started at rank F, but with an endorsement from a B rank or higher, they could start at rank E or even D. Rio realized this meant Abel was above B rank, which made him feel proud. Abel got shy and changed the subject, explaining that higher ranks allowed access to better quests and rewards. He recommended ranking up, adding that Rio probably wouldn't need to worry about money anyway from selling the Wyvern magic stones. Rio wondered if the stones were that valuable, and Abel explained they were quite rare, selling them all at once could crash the market, but he trusted the guild to handle it. They arrived at the guild, where the receptionist, Nina, was shocked to see Abel alive. Soon, all the adventurers gathered around him, and Rio realized Abel was very popular. Rio stepped outside for air, where an elf girl walked past, noticed his Fairy King outfit, and remarked he must have impressed the Fairy King. Rio was unable to answer properly, and she said she was in a hurry but perhaps they would meet again. A short while later, Abel took Rio back inside and told everyone he had survived only because of Rio, who would soon be registering. Abel hoped they would all look after him. Rio was happy to be the center of attention as others praised him for saving Abel. They moved on to Rio's registration. Abel said he wished to recommend him for D rank, shocking Nina, as this was the first time anyone from his party had recommended an adventurer. Abel said Rio was very talented. Nina had no problem with it but stated that, according to the rules, they needed physical proof of strength. Abel said he hoped to speak to the guild master about it. Nina went to inform the guild master while they waited. When Nina shared the news, Guild Master Hugh rushed over, eager to see Abel, whom he had been very worried about. He then noticed Rio, introduced himself as Hugh Glass, and thanked him, making Rio feel awkward. Rio said he was just in the right place at the right time. Abel told Hugh he wanted to endorse Rio for a rank up. Hugh asked about the required proof, and Abel confidently assured him Rio was stronger than he was. Abel showed him the magic stones, and Hugh realized their green color meant they were from wind elementals. Based on their size and glow, he suspected they were from Wyverns, which Abel confirmed. Hugh was shocked, finding it hard to believe they had collected so many, as fighting that many would normally require an entire army. He worried such monsters could destroy the city if they attacked, but Abel reassured him there was no need for concern, as they had encountered them far south of the Malefic Mountains. Rio was surprised to hear the name. Abel told him that earlier, after finding the road to Killardy, he had realized where they were. Hugh revealed it was said no one had made it through those mountains alive, and even experienced adventurers avoided them without a compelling reason. Hugh couldn't believe they had defeated all those Wyverns by themselves, but with the physical proof of Rio's abilities, he had no objections to the rank-up request. Suddenly, Abel's party, the Crimson Sword, arrived at the guild. Abel went to catch up with his old friends while Rio headed off to finish the registration process. As Rio entered the guild master's office, he wondered if he truly deserved D rank. Hugh explained that while Abel was gifted, even he couldn't take down a Wyvern alone, so if Rio helped defeat several, he must be exceptionally talented. As Hugh patted Rio on the back to congratulate him, he was surprised by how strong Rio's body felt for a mage. Just then, Nina arrived with paperwork, properly introduced herself, and began Rio's registration with a short interview. She asked his name, confirmed he was a mage, and asked about his magic element, which he said was water. When she asked where he lived, Rio explained he had just arrived. Nina informed him that for the first 300 days after joining, he was allowed to stay in the guild's lodgings. She asked if he had ever been in a dungeon, and he admitted he hadn't. She told him about a monthly introductory dungeoning course for new adventurers. When she asked if he was interested, Rio excitedly said yes. She said she would sign him up for the next course in 2 days and told him to be in the 3rd floor meeting room at 9 o'clock, adding there was a clock in town to help keep time. With that, Nina wrapped up the paperwork but confused Rio when she said it was time to start the actual registration. She asked Rio to place his hand on a crystal, and the device instantly created his guild card, which she handed to him, congratulating him on officially becoming a registered adventurer. As they left, Hugh felt relaxed, having been truly worried about Abel. He thought he never wanted to experience that again and thanked Rio even more for saving them all. He remembered he hadn't informed someone about Abel's return and immediately grabbed his communication device to make a call. Meanwhile, Abel took Rio on a walk. When Rio asked where they were going, Abel said they were off to get his rewards for helping him return. Abel mentioned he wanted to buy Rio new clothes and a staff. Rio thanked him but admitted he didn't understand why Abel kept mentioning a staff. Abel explained it was because he was a magician, but Rio said he could cast magic without one and also use his sword in close combat. Abel was shocked and asked about the sword, so Rio showed it to him. Abel thought it looked more like a knife than a proper sword and worried he had hurt Rio's feelings, but Rio didn't mind. Instead, he asked for Abel's help, as there were still many things he didn't know about this world. Rio soon learned a day was 24 hours, a week had 7 days, and a month had 30 days, basically the same as on Earth. He was surprised clothing was also measured in centimeters, feeling it was too much of a coincidence. He started to wonder if there was some connection, perhaps someone else had been teleported before him, explaining why so many things were the same. Abel then invited him to a party where Rio was the guest of honor. Abel introduced Rio to everyone as his savior. The next morning, Nina walked with him and asked if he had fun. Rio said he did but admitted he was a little exhausted. They soon arrived at the guild dorms, where they saw a guy doing push-ups. When he noticed Nina, he got flustered. She told them Rio would be their new roommate, and the two introduced themselves as Niels and Edo. After reminding Rio about his class, Nina left. Niels commented on her beauty, while Edo said they should stop being so formal. Just then, Nina returned with another newcomer, Ammon, who was 16. After losing his parents, becoming an adventurer was his only option to make a living. Nina told Rio that Ammon would also be taking the basic dungeon course with him, so they should go together, which they both agreed to. Meanwhile, Abel's friend Lynn couldn't believe a mage could create a thick ice shield, stating they were usually too thin and could be shattered by something as simple as an air slash. She also insisted using it mid-air to attack was impossible, but Abel told her Rio did exactly that. Lynn explained magic could typically only be conjured close to the caster, so none of it made sense. The priestess said if Abel said it, it must be true. However, Lynn feared if Rio ever turned against them or joined an enemy kingdom, it would be a big issue. Abel assured them it would never happen. When asked how he could be so sure, he explained it was because Rio hated the kingdom's name. The next day, Rio took the dungeon class. The instructor announced they had finished introductory lessons and would venture into the first floor of a real dungeon that afternoon. Ammon appeared nervous, so Rio advised him not to put too much pressure on himself. When the instructor asked for questions, Rio raised his hand and asked if there was a way to instantly travel to a cleared dungeon layer. The question impressed the instructor, though he explained only certain dungeons in the southern provinces had that feature, and such dungeons didn't exist in Lon as far as he knew. He had only heard rumors. Ammon was impressed by Rio's knowledge, thinking it was no wonder he reached D rank, but Rio quickly changed the subject, saying he had just heard it from someone else. In the afternoon, as the newbies prepared, they learned the city was built around the dungeon. They were told that every few years, the number of monsters increased drastically in an event known as the Great Tidal Boar, during which some could reach the surface, which was why the city had double-layered walls for protection. Rio realized the outer wall protected against outside threats while the inner wall defended against dungeon monsters. Ammon, already nervous, thought it sounded like a disaster waiting to happen, but the instructor reassured them it only happened once every few years and there was nothing to worry about for now. As they entered the dungeon, Rio noticed Ammon still looked tense and reassured him they were all in this together. The instructor said there were no dangerous monsters on the first floor, so they were free to explore. They soon spotted a soldier ant. Rio remembered from the beginner's guide that the easiest way to kill it was by striking the base of its neck. He fired 8 ice lances to pin the ant down and urged Ammon to finish it. Ammon rushed forward and delivered a powerful strike that cut off its neck, making him feel confident. He thanked Rio, who told him to collect the magic stone as a trophy. Ammon asked if that was allowed, and Rio explained that as adventurers, it was natural to collect magic stones. They earned their living from the dungeon. After digging out the stone, both felt proud and happy. That night, they returned to the guild to celebrate their first dungeon visit and kill. Neil said he wished they could have alcohol, but Edo explained the guild didn't serve it and they weren't allowed to bring any from outside, probably to discourage drinking. Niels argued the rules were too strict since they were just celebrating. Edo changed the subject, saying he was impressed they had defeated a soldier ant on their first excursion. Ammon thought they only succeeded because Rio pinned it down, but Rio praised Ammon's skill with the sword. Niels was happy they got the magic stone, and Edo asked their plans for tomorrow. Ammon said he wanted to visit the dungeon again but didn't feel confident going alone. Rio offered to go with him and suggested trying to reach the third floor, which Ammon eagerly agreed to. Rio found it odd and showed up on the first floor, and Niels mentioned normally only bats were found there. Edo told them there had been reports of ants appearing on the first and second floors over the past few months, which made Rio wonder why. Suddenly, Abel approached from behind and joined the conversation, explaining the ants could dig tunnels up to the first floor. Rio thought veteran adventurers shouldn't sneak up on rookies, especially since his friends looked startled, but Abel said he was just sharing expert knowledge to help them relax. Abel told Rio's roommates that while Rio was strong, he had some personality issues, so they should look after him. Rio felt he shouldn't be bothering them like this. When they realized Abel was from the Crimson Sword, Niels quickly jumped up, proudly saying he was an F-rank swordsman and that Abel was his hero. He asked to shake hands, and Abel happily agreed, filling Niels with joy. Abel advised them not to push themselves too hard, reminding them survival was every adventurer's top priority. Niels promised to remember, but Rio wondered why Abel showed up so late. Abel explained their last quest was tougher than expected and took longer to complete. They had just gotten back. Then his party members showed up, surprised to see him there since they were supposed to report to the guild master. Abel made an excuse, saying he was guiding the newbies, but his friend Warren picked him up and threw him over his shoulder. Abel called to Rio for help, but Rio said reporting the mission was important, and as party leader, Abel should do his part. Abel didn't like that response and jokingly called Rio a traitor. Before leaving, Lynn walked up to Rio and silently stared at him for a few seconds. A few minutes later, Rio's friends talked about how impressed they were by the Crimson Sword. As they praised Abel, Rio didn't understand why they were so interested. Meanwhile, as Abel was being taken to the guild master, Rio told Lynn not to stare at people, thinking about how she was watching Rio. Lynn replied anyone would be curious after hearing Abel praise him. Abel then told them not to worry, they would soon see Rio's power for themselves. The others just thought he was trying to act cool. The next morning, Ammon was excited to head back to the dungeon, but Rio reminded him to take it slow. Once inside, they quickly encountered monsters. Rio fired ice lances while Ammon, feeling more confident, sliced through a lunging wolf with ease. Another wolf tried to sneak up on Ammon, but Rio hit it with more ice lances, giving Ammon the chance to finish it off. With each fight, Ammon grew more confident. After defeating all the wolves, Rio told Ammon his swordsmanship reminded him of Abel. He recalled that Ammon once mentioned his teacher was a former adventurer from his village. Ammon explained his teacher's name was Kira, who had trained at a well-known school in the capital. Rio said he believed Ammon had the potential to become a great swordsman like Abel. Ammon was impressed that Rio, despite being a mage, seemed so knowledgeable about swordsmanship. Rio explained he used to train with a mentor, but since his style was original, he didn't know if he was skilled in it. Rio asked if Ammon was ready to continue exploring. Ammon said yes, but Rio thought he should rest longer since his fighting style seemed exhausting. He suggested Ammon start running regularly to build stamina, recalling how Abel used to train first thing in the morning. Rio added that even the most talented fighters had to practice hard, which motivated Ammon to push himself even more. The next day, Rio headed to the library to learn more about alchemy. The receptionist handed him a few introductory books, a beginner's guide and a recipe book. After reading, Rio thought he would need his own copies if he wanted to take alchemy seriously, though he wondered how much they might cost. Suddenly, the entire town went dark as an eclipse covered the sky. Something felt off, as if the whole world had shifted. Rio sent someone behind him and quickly summoned multiple layers of ice walls just in time to block a fire attack from an unknown enemy. As the dust settled, Rio saw a demon girl. The demon seemed surprised a human got caught up in this but casually added it didn't matter, as she was going to kill him anyway. From the power behind her attack, Rio realized she was an Akuma. He knew he should run but wasn't sure if escaping was even possible. The Akuma girl formed a massive ball of fire, and Rio quickly summoned multiple ice walls again. However, he noticed they weren't holding up as well as before. She blasted a hole through the wall and fired a wind bullet at him, but Rio managed to dodge, avoiding a direct hit to the heart. She was surprised he blocked her hellfire and even more shocked when he dispelled her wind lance. Then she noticed the robe he was wearing and realized it came from the Fairy King. Annoyed, she decided to fight him up close. The Akuma charged to finish him off, but Rio wasn't ready to give up. He drew his sword and began blocking her strikes with determination. She mocked him for being too slow, so he followed up with ice attacks, but she dodged them with ease. Rio quickly realized she was using wind magic to move at high speed. She suddenly jumped into the air and launched a powerful attack, but Rio blocked it just in time with his sword. Rio thought that as long as he stayed on the defensive, she wouldn't be able to land a hit. He also felt her strikes were nothing compared to his training with the Dullahan. The Akuma noticed he was wielding the Fairy King's sword too and started to question what he really was. She began forming a fire attack, but Rio dispelled it with an ice lance before she could launch it. Shocked by his speed, she wondered how he was casting so quickly and called him a monster with incredible abilities. She realized how dangerous he was and charged with full force. But Rio dispelled all her attacks and pushed her back before launching massive ice spikes in her direction. In response, she used raw power to create 2 concrete walls from the ground, blocking all his attacks effectively. Just as the Akuma girl thought she was safe, Rio launched a surprise attack from above, injuring her shoulder and cheek. He rushed in to press the advantage but quickly realized she had already healed. While he was momentarily distracted, she sent him flying into a nearby building. The Akuma girl believed she had won, but suddenly water droplets began to fall from the sky. As soon as they touched her, they started burning her skin, and she screamed in pain. Enraged, she unleashed a massive wave of bloodlust. Fortunately for Rio, the eclipse ended just in time. She introduced herself as Leonor, but Rio already knew she was an Akuma. She was surprised he was aware of her kind's existence, which meant she should have killed him, but she knew it was impossible to defeat him within the time limit. Leonor told him she enjoyed the fight and looked forward to seeing him again, but Rio didn't feel the same. Still, Leonor insisted they would meet again because of how strong he was. Even if she couldn't return, he might encounter others like her. This left Rio intrigued, realizing there were more Akumas in the world. Before leaving, she warned him not to get himself killed because now his life belonged to her. Leonor also hoped to be stronger next time they met, then suddenly vanished. Rio felt glad to be alive and believed it was all because of the robe, otherwise, there would be a hole in his shoulder. He decided his next step was to buy those books, so he headed off to withdraw some money from his account. After withdrawing, he felt happy, realizing he was quite rich from selling the Wyvern stones to the guild and wouldn't have to worry about making a living anymore. But when he returned to their room, he found no one there. He decided to head to the bookstore but on the way spotted some adventurers bullying his friends in the street. Rio heard the leader telling his group they should always be ready for an attack since monsters don't give warnings, but before he could finish, Rio knocked the bullies out with precise ice magic. Their leader, Dan, got angry and tried to punch Rio, but Rio easily dodged and hit him with the handle of his sword so hard he ended up vomiting. Then Rio gave his friends magic potions to heal quickly. He noted they must be exhausted and suggested they all go to the hot springs to recover. Later at the hot springs, Edo healed his shoulder injury using healing magic. Edo was surprised Rio was hurt despite being so strong in battle. Ammon asked what Rio was fighting earlier, but Rio avoided the question, saying he would tell them another time when he was ready. The next day, Rio's friends headed to the dungeon and together defeated several monsters, but Ammon got wounded fighting goblins. Edo used lesser heal to cure his wounds. Ammon thanked him, and Niels thought it was a close call. Edo added that goblin archers shouldn't be on the 5th floor. Niels suggested they call it a day and head back to the surface, splitting their winnings 3-way as usual, which surprised Ammon that they were already leaving. Niels said they shouldn't push their luck further. His motto was that survival was their top priority, which made Edo wonder if he got that from Abel. Niels argued it was only logical to prioritize their lives, and everyone agreed. Ammon then thought things would have been much easier if Rio had come with them, but Edo pointed out that a party was usually made up of members with similar skill levels, and they were no match for him. Outside the dungeon, Rio thought he needed to improve his skills and turn weaknesses into strengths. He recalled Leonor's incredible speed during their fight and suspected she used wind magic to close the distance, which made him a bit jealous. Still, he reminded himself there was no point chasing what he couldn't have. Instead, he should focus on what he could do. He wondered if there was a way to move quickly using water magic, and the first spell that came to mind was Water Jet. He remembered he had used it underwater to surface before but hadn't used it on land, so he decided to test it. Rio created a thick layer of ice on the ground and tried to imagine ice coming from all points in his back to propel him forward. He created a total of 256 water jets behind him but wasn't successful, leaving him disappointed. However, he reassured himself it was a work in progress, and next time he would try with over 1,000 water jets. He decided to visit the library to read more on Akumas and alchemy. Meanwhile, Lin read through forbidden spell books but couldn't find any information on the spells Abel said Rio could use. She thought it was impossible to create a thick ice wall in midair or ice spears strong enough to pierce a wyvern's defenses. The only explanation she could think of was that they were original spells, but in her mind, only the Empire's Inferno magician was capable of creating something like that. Sarah arrived and was surprised to see Lin there. Lin said she was looking for something but unfortunately didn't find it. Curious, Lin asked if she was away on a quest. Sarah replied she went on a mission to the royal capital and told Lin she should go now, as the envoy was waiting for her. Meanwhile, Niels struggled to talk to Nina. She commented they came back rather quickly, so Edo explained about the archer goblins on the 5th floor. When Nina saw the magic stones, she realized they were telling the truth and quickly rushed off to inform the guild master, thanking them for sharing such important information. Nina informed Hugh about the recent discovery, and he noted those monsters weren't supposed to appear until after the 10th floor, so it was a serious warning sign. He asked if there were any B-rank parties currently in town. Nina told him both the Crimson Sword and the White Brigade were around. Hugh asked if the brigade's main force, led by Phelps, was present. She confirmed they returned from an excursion 2 days ago, so they should be in town. Hugh then told her to summon both groups. He would meet them in his office. A short while later, Abel heard the White Brigade was coming too and wasn't happy about it since he didn't know how to deal with them. But Rhea pointed out he had known them for a while, so he should understand them well enough. Lin thought Abel was always whining and told him he should learn from Warren. When they arrived at Hugh's office, they saw the White Brigade was already there, and Phelps greeted Abel. Abel returned the greeting with his usual response. Hugh thanked everyone and assumed Nina had already filled them in, but he repeated the key point: goblin archers had been spotted on the dungeon's 5th floor. Abel asked how reliable the information was, and Hugh said it was 100% confirmed. The adventurers who saw it brought back the magic stones as proof. Phelps then asked what they were expected to do, and Hugh explained he wanted them to enter the dungeon and check for any signs of a dungeon stampede, referring to the explosive growth in monster population. Hugh explained it had been 10 years since the last one, so they were likely due for another soon. Rhea believed the appearance of goblin archers on the 5th floor could be an early warning sign. Hugh then added they would be paid 100 gold coins up front and 200 more upon completion. Abel asked if their only job was to confirm whether it was really happening. Hugh explained if it was, they must immediately return to the surface so the dungeon entrance could be abandoned and double walls set up in a joint effort between the guild and the regional knights. He added he had already informed the local lord about the quest and shared defense plans. Abel thought that was a lot of preparation and figured Hugh must truly believe the dungeon stampede had already begun if he was making such detailed plans. Hugh agreed, saying it was better to be over-prepared. If it was really happening, they would need every available force. He told them to be ready as they would head out the next morning, having already issued a notice closing the dungeon to other adventurers. Finally, Hugh asked if they were willing to accept the quest, and both parties eagerly accepted. The next morning at the guild dorms, Rio got ready to head out, and the others wondered where he was going so early. Rio said he had heard the North Side Library was very advanced, so he planned to study alchemy and secretly hoped to find more information about Akumas. Ido mentioned only D-rank adventurers were allowed there, but Rio was already prepared for that. Ammon then wondered if the rumors were true about the library having forbidden texts. However, Ido pointed out Rio needed to be B-rank to gain access, which left him a bit disappointed, but Niels encouraged him, saying he would qualify soon enough. The others also started getting ready to head to the dungeon and wished Rio luck before he left. A little while later, Rio arrived at the library. He thought the southern one was bigger, but he liked the atmosphere here. Suddenly, he spotted the elf girl he met in the city a few days ago. Meanwhile, both parties arrived at the dungeon entrance. Abel noticed the White Brigade had only half as many members, so Phelps explained they only brought C-rank adventurers or higher. When the guild master asked if they were ready to open the gate, Abel stopped him, having a bad feeling. He told Lynn to use her wind magic to scan the first floor. Lynn used her magic and saw over 100 monsters just on the first floor. They realized the dungeon stampede had already begun. Hugh immediately ordered his men to alert the knights and close the city gates, as the monsters would be coming out any second now. At the guild, Niels, Ido, and Ammon noticed the dungeon was closed for the day and wondered if it was connected to yesterday's issue. Just then, a messenger arrived and announced the dungeon stampede had begun. According to emergency protocol, all adventurers must head to the walls to help stop the monsters. Meanwhile, Rio met the elf girl, who introduced herself as Syrah. She asked what brought him there, and Rio said he wanted to study alchemy, which she found fascinating. He explained he hoped to create a golem, which impressed her even more since it was a very difficult task. Unfortunately, Syrah didn't know of any books specifically about golemcraft, but she said there were some that could help him learn the basics. She told Rio to follow her and asked if he liked reading. He said he loved it but hadn't been around books in a long time. Syrah joked he made it sound like it had been decades. Rio then asked if she was an elf, which she confirmed, adding she was also an adventurer in a B-rank party called Wind, though she was the only member. That reminded Rio of what Abel said about there being only one elf in town. Syrah mentioned it was unusual for an elf to live in a human settlement, but she was glad she did because it led her to meet him. She then took Rio to the section where he might find books on golemcraft. Meanwhile, the city gates closed as they tried to seal off all access to the dungeon. Realizing the monsters were coming, everyone took their positions. Suddenly, the dungeon door broke as a horde of goblins poured outside. Hugh quickly ordered everyone to launch long-range attacks to weaken them before they got too close. They managed to hold off the goblins just long enough for Margrave Lon's knights to arrive, which gave everyone some relief. Hugh was glad he had met with Commander Neville the day before. But even so, the number of goblins was far greater than during the last stampede 10 years prior. Hugh grew more worried as the goblins kept coming, slowly wearing down the adventurers and knights. Phelps told his team to brace for a long battle, especially since they were only facing goblins so far. Abel and his team were fully prepared. He told Lynn to conserve her mana but also said if she had any powerful spell that could help turn the tide, she shouldn't hesitate to use it. They soon ran out of arrows, but fortunately, other adventurers arrived with more from all the weapon stores in town. Niels told Abel he had a message from the guild master, a bigger threat was likely on the way, and he wanted the Crimson Sword to be ready to handle it. Ammon helped distribute arrows while Ido focused on healing the injured adventurers. After they finally defeated most of the goblins, Hugh told everyone it was time to descend from the wall and go on the offensive. They followed his order. Lynn used her wind magic to help them land safely, while a girl named Shenna created a clay wall to block off the goblins. Abel and Phelps leaped over the wall and swiftly took down the goblins, showing off their superior skills. They soon came across a huge goblin and realized it was a goblin general. Phelps thought the battle would be over once they defeated it, but Abel noticed there were 3 generals, which meant the Goblin King must be nearby. Abel quickly devised a strategy. He and Phelps would each take on 1 general while Rhea and Shenna handled the 3rd. They needed to be quick before the Goblin King showed up. They bravely faced the challenge, but just as they were fighting the generals, Abel suddenly sensed something and shouted for everyone to duck. A powerful air slash struck them, and Abel realized the Goblin King was willing to sacrifice his own generals to kill them. Watching the battle, Hugh thought only Abel's magic sword and Phelps's spear could defeat the king, but even with those weapons, they seemed to be struggling against such a formidable opponent with so much raw power. As Phelps got pushed back, he thought things didn't look good. But Abel suddenly stepped in front of him and charged at the Goblin King using his perfect shadow technique. He then activated his total impalement technique and stabbed the king in the chest. However, even after being pierced, the Goblin King didn't go down, shocking everyone. Abel remarked he hadn't expected it to be that easy. He called out to Lynn, and she unleashed her magic spell, Bullet Rain, which finally took down the Goblin King. Everyone was relieved they had succeeded. Phelps realized Lynn had been preparing her ultimate move the entire time, and Abel explained it was a powerful spell but required a long incantation. Meanwhile, deeper inside the dungeon, something even more terrifying was sealed behind a door. As Rio returned to the guild, he noticed the hall filled with adventurers all celebrating something, so he wondered what that was about. Meanwhile, Hugh wished he could also drink and relax because he still had lots of paperwork to handle. He noted that on top of everything, researchers from the royal capital would be arriving soon to conduct research on the recent incident. Although the dungeon would be closed for a month, he believed the aftermath of the attack would be much worse. A while later, Rio met his friends, who explained the situation to him. He finally understood why they were drinking alcohol, even though it was normally not allowed in the guild. Niels excitedly told Rio about Abel's expert swordsmanship and how he defeated the Goblin King, thrusting his sword while signaling Lynn to unleash her ultimate spell. Edo added it was actually Bullet Rain, one of the most powerful wind spells. Edo also joined the discussion, saying only Abel was able to dodge it, but he wondered how. Just then, Abel arrived and told them he used the sword skill Perfect Shadow, a technique for dodging any kind of ranged attack, including magic. Niels praised Abel for his heroic performance earlier, but Abel insisted Niels was also great in his supporting role. Rio found the name Perfect Shadow rather strange, and Abel had already expected him to say something like that. Their conversation was cut short by the sudden arrival of Lynn and Rhea. The girls teased Abel, saying they already expected him to be with Rio since he seemed to be his favorite person, though Rio suspected they might be a bit jealous. Lynn asked Rio if he could really create ice walls in midair. He confirmed he could up to about 40 meters above the ground, which surprised her. Rio reassured her it wasn't easy and took a lot of practice. Lynn remarked most people couldn't do it and asked if it was an original spell. Rio was unsure, so she rephrased, explaining most magic was cast by reciting existing incantations. Rio explained incantations were a matter of personal preference and varied, but Lynn still didn't quite understand. Niels then reminded Rio the food would be gone if they kept talking, so Rio excused himself. Abel explained that according to Rio, incantations were used mainly for show, and he could cast spells without them, leaving Lynn wondering how such a thing was even possible. The next day, Rio found his friends gathered around the job board and wondered why they weren't working. They explained the dungeon was closed, so they planned to take a collection quest on the surface, but there was a surplus in the market, so no one was offering extraction contracts. They asked if Rio was also looking for quests, but he said he was searching for a type of ore he needed for his alchemy practice. They guessed he meant magic copper ore, which was very expensive. But Rio said it was only 500,000 florins. Ammon pointed out that was roughly 50 gold coins, and Niels joked it must be nice to be that rich. Niels lamented they couldn't earn anything without jobs. So Rio got an idea and decided to hire them all to collect magic copper ore. They prepared to head to the abandoned mine near the village of Ruse, about half a day's walk away. Rio offered each of them for gold coins regardless of how much they collected and an additional 25 gold coins for every piece of magic copper ore they found. His only condition was that they avoid unnecessary danger and return safely. Niels asked if Rio was really sure about this, but Rio pointed out that 37 gold coins was still less than what he'd pay for the ore in town. However, since it wasn't a guild job, they wouldn't receive any credit for it. They all happily accepted the mission. Rio returned to his room only to hear some commotion outside. He looked outside and was surprised to see soldiers bullying a girl, and even more surprised that the one trying to protect her was none other than Dan, the same person Rio had taught a lesson to not long ago. As the knights tried to take the girl away, Dan pulled her back and pushed them away. One soldier prepared to strike him but surprisingly lost his balance and fell. Dan himself seemed unsure of what just happened. The knight tried to attack again, but the same thing happened, he ended up on the ground once more. They wondered what was happening. Just then, Felt suddenly arrived and demanded to know what the knights were doing. They told him not to interfere since he was just an adventurer, but he replied he was also a nobleman, introducing himself as the heir to House Heinlein. Realizing he was the son of the former commander of the Royal Knights, the soldiers were frightened and quickly fled. Phelps praised Dan for his bravery and told him to take the girl to her friends. He then turned to Rio and asked if he was the one Abel had been praising so highly, introducing himself as the captain of the White Brigade. Phelps said Abel had told him about Rio, but after seeing his magic firsthand, he was certain Rio was truly talented. Rio felt nervous. So Phelps remarked the knight must have simply slipped, trying not to reveal Rio's powers since he likely wanted to keep them hidden. Phelps added during their recent mission, Abel was certain it would have been much easier to handle the great tidal boar if Rio had been there. They were then interrupted by Phelps's companion, who reminded him they were running late. Before leaving, Phelps thanked Rio again for dealing with the knights. As they walked away, Rio noted how strong they were but wondered why the son of a marquis was working as an adventurer. Later that night, while Rio was enjoying his dinner, Abel interrupted him and asked why he was sitting alone. Rio joked he wouldn't pay Abel's bill and that Abel should be treating him instead since he was the senior, but Abel knew how much money Rio had and refused. When the chef asked what they'd like, Abel ordered the daily special. Rio then asked why Abel was alone, teasing that he must be planning to visit the red light district later, catching Abel off guard. When Abel got defensive, Rio asked if he had a special girl and if it was Lynn, but Abel said she liked Warren, then realized he said more than he should. Rio remarked it was an unusual pair but admitted love came in all shapes and sizes. He then asked if Abel was interested in Rio, but Abel quickly denied it. Rio teased him for reacting like a middle schooler, a term Abel didn't understand. When Rio again asked why he was alone, Abel decided to take him along. They headed to the market where Abel told Rio one of the investigators sent to LON was an old acquaintance. The investigator was guarded by royal knights, but a few were corrupt and had slipped away that night. Abel's task was to track them down before they caused any trouble. Rio suddenly stopped Abel, pointing out some hooded adventurers he didn't recognize from Abel's welcome party. Abel assumed they were there for dungeon exploration, but Rio reminded him the dungeon was closed. They followed the men into an alley where a hooded man tried to launch a sneak attack on Rio. He blocked it easily and quickly took them all down with a couple of ice blocks from above. Rio found them disappointing, expecting more of a challenge. While Abel noticed an alchemy box, Rio got excited, but Abel told him it was for investigation. Abel learned the men were actually C-rank adventurers from Jlair, the capital of Handaloo, and wondered what they were doing there. He decided to hand them over to the city guards. Rio joked this was a rare accomplishment for him, but Abel said it was nothing new. Rio then asked if bragging about his adventures to everyone at the party counted as one, prompting Abel to ask how he even knew about that. Meanwhile, as Phelps was walking, the knights from earlier tried to attack him in revenge. However, they were intercepted by Shenna, who incinerated them with her fire magic, leaving no trace behind, leaving Phelps impressed. Later, a group of men arrived in town and met with Hugh, who wasn't pleased when they asked him to reopen the dungeon for their investigation and to provide adventurers for their protection. One of the men, Clive Staples, explained His Majesty had appointed Earl Harold Lawrence, the Minister of Domestic Affairs, as the new head of their research expedition, giving them full authority over the team while they were in the field. However, Hugh reminded them some requests simply weren't realistic. Clive again emphasized what it meant to have complete authority, but Hugh thought they had forgotten the meaning of unreasonable. Their leader apologized for the food situation and said he would arrange for supplies from neighboring towns, but Clive insisted the dungeon must be reopened. Hugh paused, then agreed on the condition that if anything happened to his town or its adventurers, the guild would not be held responsible. He firmly added if they couldn't accept that, the dungeon would remain closed. The man agreed. Earl remarked they could hire adventurers at a good rate, but Hugh told him it depended on the adventurers themselves. Before they began the dungeon exploration, Hugh warned them there were no records of the dungeon's condition after a great tidal bore, so they should proceed with caution. Meanwhile, Rio visited the place where Abel's party stayed and thought their cafeteria must be nice. Before he could go in, a girl approached and asked about the guild, saying she needed to deliver an important letter there. Rio planned to eat first, but the girl insisted. A little later, Rio took her inside, and she handed the letter to Abel, saying it was from Professor Harrion. Abel read it and found the professor wanted him to support the court magicians in their dungeon investigation. Rio asked if the dungeon wasn't closed, so Abel explained about the investigation party, a worried look on his face. When Rio asked if something was bothering him, Abel told him about an A-rank party that never returned, and it wasn't just any A-rank party. Their leader was said to be a superhuman on the verge of S-rank. This meant they had no idea what happened inside the dungeon after a great tidal bore. Rio thought the smart choice would be to stay safe, then excused himself to have his meal while the girl thanked him for guiding her. Ria asked her name, and she introduced herself as Natalie Schwarzkopf. Lynn recognized her family as famous water magicians, but Natalie said she wasn't that impressive. Lynn then asked if Natalie had heard of a spell that could conjure an ice wall some distance from the caster, but Natalie hadn't heard of it either. Abel wondered why Lynn was so obsessed with Rio's abilities, but Lynn protested, saying any magician would be interested in learning a spell like that. Just then, Natalie interrupted to ask if magic like that actually existed, so they told her Rio was capable of doing it. On that note, Abel told them if they ever fought Rio, not even the four of them together could defeat him, so they might as well give up. Besides, Rio wasn't the type to kill anyone. He also advised Natalie that if she ever needed help and they weren't available, she could ask Rio, who could usually be found in the guild's room number 10 or in the library. The next morning, Abel met the team of investigators while Harrion explained a magic device used to trace mana left in the environment. Anything it detected would be reported to the analysis team in the tent. Abel showed great interest. Harrion asked if he had begun to like alchemy, but Abel said it was actually his friend who was interested, surprising the old man as he never imagined Abel to be the type who had friends. On the other hand, Rio's friends returned with the ore he had requested, so he rewarded them generously, making them really happy. Edo noted the dungeon was surprisingly opened once again, but Rio added it was only for D-rank and above adventurers. Meanwhile, Abel's team kept moving deeper. After 3 days, they reached the 7th floor without encountering any monsters. Harrion explained the analysis team on the surface was reviewing their readings but hadn't found anything unusual yet. Abel thought they would need to go deeper. Just then, he noticed the researchers from the Royal Central University were in a hurry. So Ryla remarked they were assuming the monsters from the Great Tidal Bore came from below the 38th level. The next day, Hugh explained that E and F rank parties couldn't enter the dungeon, but they could take on alternate work by transporting food from other towns, which would require security. He added the White Brigade was already involved, but they could use more volunteers. Rio then asked about the color of the stones collected during the Great Tidal Bore, and Hugh told him they were pale, which surprised him. Meanwhile, the exploration team discovered a strange door in the dungeon. One of the investigators mentioned it might be connected to another place. Clive was thrilled his team was the first to find this gate, so he ordered everyone to set up the equipment and begin examining it immediately. They quickly got everything in place, but as soon as the magic tool touched the dark gate, everyone vanished. In the very next moment, they all found themselves surrounded by a dark abyss. Abel quickly called out to his comrades, asking if they were all right, and they confirmed. He then walked over to Harold and asked him what was going on. Harold replied they had been relocated. At the same time, Clive and his team had been transported somewhere else in the dark abyss as well. Considering their situation, Clive immediately ordered the other adventurers to quit standing around and start examining their surroundings at once. They needed to stay cautious because they never knew what might appear. While others checked the area, one adventurer approached Clive and asked him to explain what just happened. Clive answered he couldn't say for sure, but it was most likely they were teleported to this strange place. That's why gathering information was so important right now. Clive believed the gate was most likely responsible. Their previous theory claimed the monsters from the Great Tidal Bore came from below the 38th layer, but with the way things were unfolding, that theory had clearly been proven wrong. He believed there was a strong chance the gate itself was the true source. However, as Clive thought about it, he realized this might actually turn out to be a good thing. Discovering the real root of the tidal bore would be an excellent finding, especially because it directly contradicted the prevailing theory. Clive smirked, realizing if he could make any vital discoveries, it might be enough to get him promoted to department head. Just then, one adventurer called out to Clive, pointing behind him and saying he heard something coming from that direction. Elsewhere, Natalie and two other mags were busy trying to use their magic compass to track down where that group of adventurers was teleported, but they were thrown into confusion because each time the compass gave a reading, the result vanished a second later. A few moments passed, and then the compass briefly showed the adventurers were on the 40th floor, but just as quickly, the reading disappeared again. At that moment, a man named Christopher Black walked in. He introduced himself as one of the organizers of the investigation and said he was also acting directly under the king's orders. He then asked the person in charge if there was anything unusual happening inside the dungeon right now. The mage in charge hesitated, but Christopher noticed, remarking it was natural to be cautious about sharing information since they belonged to different organizations, but for now, he only asked them to share whatever they could to show how serious things had become. Christopher told them the adventurers who entered the dungeon just a few moments ago vanished right before his eyes. Natalie and the other adventurers were shocked. Christopher continued explaining he was just about to enter with a group of local adventurers they had hired, but as soon as they crossed the entrance, the adventurers suddenly disappeared. Natalie listened closely and replied her magic compass readings also suggested multiple disappearances. She explained the last disappearance she detected happened on the 40th floor. Christopher was shocked because the deepest any adventurer had ever reached before was the 38th layer. Anything beyond the 30th was a challenge even for B-rank parties. Hearing this, the adventurer in charge spoke up, saying one of Lon's B-rank parties, the Crimson Sword, was escorting his team, and he strongly believed they would still be together. Natalie heard this and didn't like the sound of it, but after a few moments, she suddenly got an idea and quickly ran off to put it into action. Meanwhile, the adventurer in charge mentioned he had already sent a messenger to the Adventurers Guild, so he hoped the guild master would come as soon as he heard the news. That same afternoon, Nina arrived at the guild and told Hugh something had gone terribly wrong in the dungeon. The entire investigation team suddenly vanished without a trace. She also explained Christopher, the dean of the College of Magic, was asking Hugh to come to the dungeon entrance right away. Hearing this, Hugh began to sweat, wondering if this disappearance also included Abel and his party. Without wasting another moment, he jumped up and declared he was heading out immediately. He instructed Nina to keep the rest of the staff on standby and grabbed his coat while telling her to assemble their liaison at the dungeon's entry point. However, he made it clear the adventurers in the guild must not know any details yet. Instead, he told Nina to simply inform them he would explain everything once he confirmed the truth. Meanwhile, Rio entered the town's massive library because he needed to check out some very important books, but after a short while, he became overwhelmed, realizing the library was so enormous he didn't know where to begin. He climbed the stairs with a sigh, muttering he really wished Syrah were there to help him. Today turned out to be his lucky day, as Syrah was seen standing right by his side. Seeing her, Rio lit up with excitement and rushed over, explaining he came to compare records of past eclipses and great tidal bores but was completely lost. Syrah told him he was lucky because she knew exactly where those records were kept, so she led the way. While guiding him, Sira asked if he believed there could be a connection between eclipses and great tidal boars. Rio answered he suspected there might be a partial link. Hearing this, Sira nodded and said he was right to think that way. She confirmed his suspicion. She explained she had studied this subject before and discovered every great tidal bore in history had been preceded by an eclipse, but she pointed out this time was different since it was a full eclipse. That's what made this case unusual. Curious, she turned to Rio and asked how he managed to come to the same conclusion. Rio stiffened, realizing he couldn't possibly tell her he was fighting an Akuma right in the middle of the eclipse. To avoid suspicion, he quickly changed the topic and asked Sira what determined the brightness of a magic stone. Sira immediately realized he was dodging but still answered, telling him the longer a monster lived, the brighter and more vivid its magic stone became. Rio agreed, saying he learned that himself during a past journey with a friend, but what troubled him was that all the stones he collected from monsters during the tidal bore were pale and dull. If they had been brightly colored, it would have meant elder monsters from lower levels were resurfacing. Hearing this, Sira responded pale stones suggested the monsters had only recently spawned. Rio nodded but pointed out how strange it was for an entire group to spawn so suddenly all at once, completely out of nowhere. That said, if the monsters were created manually, it would have taken an enormous amount of mana. Sira agreed, admitting there were still too many mysteries, but she revealed she already knew about the pale magic stones. Some old records about a past great tidal bore mentioned the monsters back then also had pale stones. Rio was shocked such records existed, but Sira explained they were in poor condition, so even most librarians didn't know about them. She asked if he wanted to see them, and Rio immediately said yes, so Sira led him to where the records were kept. Meanwhile, the adventurers remained trapped in the abyss. Harold broke the silence, saying the strange sensation reminded him of teleportation magic he once experienced in a dungeon of the western provinces. He was certain they had been relocated, probably to another floor. To confirm, he asked one of the party mags if their instruments were working. The mage checked and nodded, saying their device using wind magic was functioning perfectly. He believed the surface team should be able to send them information on their location. Hearing this, Lynn brightened with hope, saying once they knew their position, the surface team would most likely send for help. But Harold wasn't so confident. He said something felt off about the aura. Turning to Rhea, he asked if she noticed it too. Rhea concentrated, then said the aura was almost identical to the one found in Sanctuary Square. Abel recognized the reference immediately, realizing they were talking about a holy spell only high-ranking priests could cast. Rhea explained further, it was considered the ultimate defensive magic capable of blocking all physical and magical attacks. Hearing this, Abel concluded they were trapped inside a massive barrier. Rhea agreed, pointing out it must be enormous since they couldn't even sense the boundaries. Abel then turned to Lynn and asked her to use her probe technique to scan the surroundings. She did so and quickly reported back, there were multiple human presences about 500 meters ahead, roughly 1,000 humans and 50 other life forms she had never encountered before. Harold assumed it must be Clive and his party since they were probably dragged in the same way. With that, the group decided to head toward the human signatures. Meanwhile, Hugh finally arrived at the dungeon entrance where Christopher was waiting. Christopher informed him the adventurers were likely teleported all the way down to the 40th floor. Hugh felt the weight instantly. Reaching that floor was impossible even if they mobilized every adventurer in town. Christopher warned the real problem wasn't just their disappearance but the cause. If they didn't know why it happened, there was no guarantee it wouldn't happen again, and he refused to put himself or his men in such danger. Hugh agreed, saying it would be reckless to endanger local adventurers under those circumstances. For now, all they could do was wait and hope. Meanwhile, Clive and his team were ambushed as purple flames rained down from above. Some adventurers managed to raise barriers and survive while others were burned alive. As Clive stared at the approaching monsters, his eyes widened in horror. These were devils he had only ever read about in books, but their appearance matched perfectly. The mags fought back but were clearly overpowered. Not long after, Abel and the others arrived at the scene. Shocked, Rhea took a closer look and immediately recognized them as devils, enemies of the gods and angels, immune to most magic and far stronger than any human. Lynn's voice carried a hint of fear as she asked why devils would be down here. Harold didn't hesitate and ordered the adventurers to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, Clive began to accept his fate since the devils kept advancing and they had no real means to fight back. But just then, several magic arrows rained down on the devils at once. The adventurers from Harold's side launched long-range magic attacks, and to their surprise, it actually caused damage. Rhea was shocked by this discovery. Since books claimed devils were immune to magic, it turned out those records were never confirmed. The adventurers held their ground with spells, but the overwhelming number worried Harold. He feared the Mags would run out of mana before defeating them all. Abel quickly decided they would have to join the battle with close-range combat. Scanning the battlefield, he noticed a much larger devil standing behind the rest and realized that one must be the boss devil. Defeating it might be the key to ending the fight. Abel led his party straight in, and together they managed to cut through several waves with ease. Harold watched and now knew why the Crimson Sword had such a good reputation. But after a few minutes, both Lynn and Ryla ran out of mana, leaving them vulnerable. They asked Warren to cover them, but the situation worsened when they revealed they were also out of magic potions. Abel quickly surveyed and saw 6 devils left. He questioned if they could finish without Lynn and Rhea's support. At that moment, Rhea urgently warned Abel the devil with mismatched eyes was actually a demon prince, the immature form of a demon lord, of which only 4 could exist at once. Rhea added only a hero had ever been recorded defeating one, so Abel must be extremely cautious. Hearing this, Abel made his decision. He stepped forward and declared he would fight to defeat every devil except the demon prince, since there was still a chance something unexpected could break the barrier and help them escape. Looking back at Rhea with a smile, he told her not to look so sad. Turning back, Abel thought this situation wasn't nearly as terrifying as when the griffin once had its eyes on them. With that, he charged and defeated 2 devils using only his sword. That's when the demon prince stepped forward, clearly signaling he wanted a one-on-one duel. They clashed fiercely, but it didn't take long for Abel to realize the enormous gap in strength. Deep down, he knew he didn't stand a chance. The Mags, pushing themselves to their limits, gathered their last mana and launched it at the demon prince, but their spells had no effect at all, confirming magic was useless. To make matters worse, the remaining devils continued bombarding them with purple fireballs, steadily breaking down their defenses. With strength fading and no hope, the adventurers started to accept this might be the end. The demon prince charged at Abel, and as a last resort, Abel unleashed his secret sword technique, Zero Turn, aiming to slice off its head. But the demon moved aside at the last moment and knocked Abel hard to the ground. Using his sword to support himself, Abel struggled to stand. Having accepted his fate, he simply apologized to Rhea for being too weak. The demon prince prepared to finish him off when suddenly a drop of water fell from the ceiling and Rio came crashing down, sticking the landing. Confused, Abel asked what Rio was doing here. Rio replied confidently he was here to save them, suggesting they retreat immediately, but Abel quickly warned about the powerful demon prince. Rio glanced and scoffed, saying that creature was far too weak to be a true demon prince. Confidently, he walked straight toward it, but Abel urged him to stay back, insisting it was dangerously strong. The devils launched a long-range attack, but Rio casually blocked it with his Ice Lance technique. In the next instant, he unleashed his water jet attack, cutting off the remaining devils' heads in a single strike. Seeing his men defeated effortlessly, the demon prince grew nervous and gripped his sword tightly. But Rio only smirked, unsheathing his ice blade, and said they should just get this over with. Earlier, Natalie rushed into Rio's room searching for him, but his roommates informed her he wasn't there, having gone to the Northern Library. She thanked them and rushed out but didn't know where that was, so she asked again for directions. After finally getting them, Natalie found Rio in the street. Seeing how exhausted she looked, he immediately asked what was wrong. She explained Abel and his party had gone missing inside the dungeon. Realizing the seriousness, Rio created an ice sled and told her they could discuss details on the way. As they traveled, she told him everything. Curious, he asked why she came to him specifically. Natalie explained Abel once told her if she ever needed help and he wasn't around, she should go to Rio because he would never refuse. Rio felt proud his friend thought so highly and decided to enter the dungeon. However, guards blocked his way. Unwilling to waste time, he created 2 ice walls and forced his way inside. Natalie had told him the signal came from the 40th floor, so he knew he couldn't afford to go floor by floor. Using his ice magic, he opened a hole in the ground that took him straight to the lower levels. At last, he reached the 40th floor where Abel's party desperately needed help. Rio teased the demon prince, asking why he didn't seem eager to fight. He raised his sword, almost as if daring the prince to attack. The demon finally charged, but to Rio, he was far too slow. With a single sidestep, Rio slashed his neck, cleanly cutting off his head. Rio thought the demon was painfully slow compared to Leonor. While Abel stared in disbelief, wondering what technique that was, to their shock, the demon calmly reattached his severed head. Rio thought the demon prince was only compensating for lost strength but felt far too weak for its rank. He briefly wondered if it could understand him, though there was no time for conversation. Instead, he decided to test its regenerative powers. Rio summoned 256 water jets that struck from every direction, slicing it into thousands of pieces, the force even breaking its magic stone. Yet before it could shatter, the demon prince froze it, leaving everyone stunned. Abel, relieved, thanked Rio for saving their lives. Rio casually replied he would accept the apology in the form of free dinners, and Abel gladly promised to treat him for the entire week. Rio rushed forward and hugged Abel, who felt guilty for making her worry. Harold then introduced himself as an advisor at the Bureau of Royal Magicians and personally thanked Rio. Rio brushed it off, saying it was nothing, but he couldn't help noticing the fallen mags. Harold acknowledged it, explaining some were not fortunate enough to survive. Once magicians recovered enough mana, they would gather the remains. Abel suggested they also collect the devil's magic stones to sell and distribute money to the families of the fallen. Rio agreed but wondered what Abel meant by devil. Abel explained such creatures supposedly hadn't appeared in the central provinces for hundreds of years. This made Rio recall Leonor introducing herself as an Akuma, and he began to wonder if there was a difference. Noticing him lost in thought, the others asked if something was wrong. Rio mentioned when he descended from the 39th to the 40th floor, he sensed a special field, though it seemed to have vanished now. Abel suggested it may have disappeared because they defeated the demon prince. Rio agreed, noting in a typical dungeon, defeating the boss often triggered a safe exit. Abel didn't quite understand, but Rio explained when he first arrived, he sensed something strange near the stairs. He thought they should investigate on the way back, perhaps connected to what happened. They noticed the devil's magic stones were black. Harold recalled when he was an adventurer, he once encountered a devil in the western provinces but was unable to defeat it. This was his first time seeing a devil's magic stone. Rio agreed, noting no records existed in the temples of the central provinces either. Harold explained devils appeared suddenly and at random, leading many to believe they possessed space-time magic, a revelation that greatly surprised Rio. Meanwhile, another party of heroes gathered around a man-made altar when Leonor suddenly appeared, having sensed something unusual. The party leader bravely stepped forward, declaring she was the demon lord he would defeat. Leonor was taken aback, surprised to hear herself called a demon lord. Another member explained the altar was built through great sacrifices, widely believed that lighting it would summon the demon lord. Leonor wondered who these people were and why they would want to summon such a being. The boy introduced himself as a hero named Roman, declaring he would kill the demon lord. Hearing he was a hero, Leonor's eyes lit up with excitement. She thought since he bore the title, he must also be strong, and facing him would bring great entertainment. Leonor prepared to fight, but Roman proved far too weak, and she defeated him with ease. She told his companions they were free to attack if they wished but warned if they did, she would have no choice but to defend herself, noting they should be more worried about their fallen hero. Just then, she noticed a black jewel and thought although the fight was boring, collecting it would justify her effort. Roman again called her a demon lord, irritating Leonor. She told them if they all worked together, they might actually be able to defeat the current demon lord, leaving the party stunned. She added there were even humans as strong as she was, recalling her fight with Rio, saying it was truly enjoyable. The group was shocked to realize she wasn't a demon lord after all. Finally, she introduced herself as Leonor and told Roman to become the strongest human he could so one day they could have a proper battle. However, Roman still refused to believe a human could be stronger than him. Before leaving, Leonor smirked and told him Rio was about 10,000 times stronger. Meanwhile, Rio and the others came across another group of adventurers from Lon. Harold suspected Clive's men probably hired them to secure the route to the 11th floor. Abel then realized it wasn't only their parties from the 10th and 11th floors who were teleported. Rio noticed a black orb and realized it must be the anomaly he picked up earlier. Harold admitted he had never seen anything like it, pointing out it was emitting mana moments ago but now the energy had vanished. Fortunately, he had a barrier bag that could prevent mana from leaking. Rio asked if he intended to take it back, and Harold confirmed, explaining it was their only piece of evidence. On their way back, Abel again thanked Rio. Rio reminded him of his promise to feed him for the whole week but added if Abel truly wanted to show appreciation, he'd like to know more about the curry shop he mentioned. Abel promised to treat him to delicious curry, and Rio warned if he forgot, he would cut him into even smaller pieces than the Demon Prince, something Abel couldn't help but laugh at. They finally made it outside, where Hugh was relieved to see them safe. Natalie greeted the group, and Abel thanked her, saying it was only because she called Rio that they were able to return alive. Hugh was glad to see Abel but wished he would stick to safer surface jobs, however, he was clearly displeased Rio ignored the guard's warnings. Rio offered an apology, but Harold stepped in, pointing out they only survived thanks to Rio. Hugh was shocked, and Harold added they could discuss the matter later in the tent. Before leaving, Hugh told Rio they weren't finished discussing the subject but thought he deserved appreciation for the help, which relieved Rio. Harold told Hugh they encountered 50 devils and a demon prince, leaving Hugh stunned, amazed they returned alive, though he admitted he shouldn't be too surprised after all, it was Abel's party. Harold explained although Abel fought impressively, the demon prince nearly killed him, shocking Hugh. He then asked if it was Rio who defeated the demon, and Harold confirmed. Curious, Harold asked Hugh who that young boy was, but Hugh admitted he didn't know either, all he knew was Rio once helped Abel return safely from the Malefic Mountains. Harold remarked it was wonderful Abel had such a powerful ally capable of killing a demon prince in a flash. Hugh didn't grasp what he meant by in a flash, so Harold clarified both the demon prince and devils were killed within seconds. Harold believed nothing was more important than ensuring their country stayed on the good side of this unprecedented magician. If aristocrats provoked him, it could cause serious problems. Because of this, Arthur decided not to leave any official record of Rio's actions. Hugh agreed and chose to leave Rio's name out of his own reports as well, reasoning their town couldn't afford to make an enemy of someone so powerful. The next morning, Rio went for a run with his friends, but they struggled to keep up. He encouraged them, saying the important thing was to keep moving forward even if they had to slow down. Later, while walking through town, Rio felt restless, thinking it might be because yesterday's battle ended abruptly. Suddenly, he caught a scent from a nearby restaurant and rushed toward it. When Rio opened the door, he found Syrah already there, also drawn by the curry. She told him it was the best in town and invited him to sit beside her. The bartender asked what level of spice they'd like, and both ordered medium hot. Rio noticed Syrah had already finished a plate. She quickly explained Els had a high metabolism and insisted she wasn't trying to compete. Rio simply replied he never said anything like that. Syrah asked Rio where he lived, and he told her the guild dorms. She teased, asking if that was where all rookies lived, then guessed since he visited the North Side Library, he must be at least D rank. Rio confirmed he was promoted to D rank upon registration, which impressed her as she already considered him strong. However, Rio said it was the first time anyone had ever told him that. Syrah thought for a moment, then suggested maybe others simply didn't know what to look for. After finishing, Rio asked why he hadn't seen her at the guild even though she was an adventurer. She explained until recently she was based in the royal capital and because of a long-term contract, she didn't visit often. Sira revealed she was a swordsmanship instructor for Margrave Lon's Order of Knights, which made Rio wonder if she also taught swordsmanship. She playfully told him she was much stronger than she looked, leaning in a bit too close and leaving him flustered. Curious, she asked if he had planned since she would like a mock battle. Rio, though nervous, agreed. Before their match, Sira remarked ever since he walked in, she could sense his frustration like he was hungry for a real battle. Surprised, Rio asked how she knew he could use a sword. Sira smiled and explained she was also a wielder of both magic and blade. With that, they formally began. Sira charged, but Rio dodged, leaving her impressed. Deciding to stop holding back, she unleashed full power. Rio quickly realized she became much faster, and during close combat, his sword snapped, forcing him to surrender. To his surprise, Sira was delighted. This was the first time anyone had withstood her wind robe technique. Only then did Rio realize she used wind magic to enhance speed. Sira asked who taught him to fight like that, and Rio replied it was his mentor, the same one who gave him his robe. Putting pieces together, she realized it was the Fairy King. Amazed, she remarked he was truly fortunate since the Fairy King was practically a legend. Just then, Relata arrived to remind Sira of her appointment with Master Alonso. Before leaving, Sira told Relata Rio was important to her and asked her to escort him home, leaving Relata visibly surprised. As they walked outside, Relata was still surprised this guy was so important to Sira. Just then, Rio encountered Hugh in his carriage, who invited him in. On their way, Hugh said Arthur had informed him about the heroic battle, but he couldn't just ignore disobedience, so he had a job as punishment. Hugh told Rio since registering, he had only taken dungeon-related jobs, so as punishment, he would accompany merchants on a round trip to Whitnash. The next day, Niels and his comrades met with Rio to ask for help with a quest. Rio quickly noticed how serious it must be since Niels spoke more formally than usual. Niels explained his hometown, the village of Abel, issued a hunting request normally rated for D-rank adventurers and above. Ido explained he and Niels were only recently promoted to E-rank after helping defeat the great Tidal boar, so they didn't qualify. Niels asked if Rio would temporarily join their party so they could take the quest together. Ammon pointed out the targets were skeletons and goblins, unusual since those creatures didn't normally appear in the same area. Hearing this, Rio smirked, thrilled at the chance to fight skeletons. He immediately said he was in. Later, they went to Hugh and informed him they planned to accept the quest. Now with Rio's assistance, Hugh began by explaining the request originally came from Killardy. Niels replied he already knew and added it had been forwarded to Elon after nobody in Killardy could complete it. Hugh nodded but added Killardy had dispatched adventurers twice before, first an E-rank party, then a D-rank party. Rio and the others found it hard to believe even a D-rank group failed at something sounding simple. Hugh explained according to the D-rank party's report, their problem was lack of cooperation from the village. Things got so bad the entire village turned against them. Ammon suggested maybe the village was hostile to outsiders, but Niels disagreed, saying while they weren't the friendliest, they would never go as far as open hostility. Putting that aside, Hugh smiled and admitted he felt relieved to have Niels and his comrades taking the request but warned them to be careful since the E-rank party came back badly wounded, having reported facing over 30 skeletons. Even so, Hugh believed with Ido as their priest, they should handle it if they avoided carelessness. He reminded them they had a couple days to prepare and told them to do their best and return home in one piece. The next day, the group began their journey to Abel. Surprisingly, the trip didn't take long. They realized they traveled faster than previous adventurers. Ammon guessed their daily stamina training had paid off. On arriving, some locals greeted Niels warmly, saying it had been a while. Rio noticed this and felt relieved the villagers were on good terms. He had assumed Niels was an exile since by looking at him, he seemed the type to cause trouble. To Rio, it felt natural to think Niels had been banished and forced to become an adventurer. Niels got nervous after hearing that and quickly changed the subject, suggesting they meet the mayor. Niels opened a cabin door and found Bulan, the village mayor, inside. Bulan couldn't believe his eyes. Niels had finally returned home. After a hug, Bulan remarked Niels looked far more mature now. Niels laughed, insisting that couldn't be true since he had only been gone about a year, but Dullahan insisted there was something different. He no longer had the same reckless troublemaker attitude. The others overheard and snickered. Dullahan noticed the group behind Niels and asked who they were. Niels introduced each as party members, and after greetings, they sat down. Once seated, they explained they came to take the hunting request. Dullahan admitted he felt Niels's group might stand a better chance, especially since Niels understood how things worked in the village. With that aside, Niels brought up the issue of the second adventurer party, saying their report claimed the village refused to cooperate, so he asked Dullahan what really happened. Dullahan took a slow sip of water before answering. He explained everything began when skeletons started appearing in the forest, first occasionally in the eastern woods, then constantly. Later, goblins began showing up in the southern region, which was why the request was made. However, Dullahan continued, the first adventurer party caused a huge problem. They chose to fight where they shouldn't have, spilling blood deep within the southern forest. Because of that, when the second party arrived, villagers reacted with anger and drove them away. Dullahan admitted asking outsiders to be mindful of where they fought was asking a lot, especially during a life-or-death struggle, but explained the people had been told for generations to avoid that particular place. Hearing this, Niels finally understood why villagers treated the last party coldly. He turned to his comrades and apologized, admitting they probably weren't following everything, explaining it was tied to a local custom and village secrets. He couldn't share full details without council elders' permission and asked them to be patient. Later that night, while Niels was away getting approval, Rio and the others chatted with Niels's younger siblings. They told the group ever since childhood, Niels never cared much about farming, all he wanted was to leave and become an adventurer the moment he was old enough. But after their parents passed away, he stayed until last year to raise his siblings until they were strong enough to survive on their own. Hearing this, his comrades admitted it sounded just like him. He was actually very caring. Niels's younger brother added he doubted anyone would oppose them handling the hunt. The last party ignored traditions and recklessly rushed into the woods, but since Niels knew customs, there shouldn't be problems. A few moments later, Niels returned and announced they had been granted permission. He suggested tomorrow they focus on goblins first, then skeletons, and said he received permission to share important information, though they must keep it confidential. Niels began by explaining two special things about the village. First, a guardian beast lived in the forest. Rio was shocked, as this was his first time hearing of such a thing. Edo chimes in, saying he had heard of certain villages having guardian beasts but didn't realize this was one. At the mention, Rio grew excited, imagining the guardian corrupted by an evil god and attacking them. Seeing Rio lost in fantasies, Niels pulled him back. Rio admitted he got carried away, then asked about the second important thing. Niels explained it concerned the village shrine, but the elder insisted on explaining herself. Since it was late, they would have to wait until the next day. The next morning, Dullahan took the group to the area where most goblin sightings were reported. Normally children played here, but for now they had been warned to stay away, though some still broke rules. Hearing this, Rio teased Niels, saying he must have been that type of kid, which struck a nerve. At that moment, the others noticed several goblin footprints. In the same instant, Rio looked into the distance and sensed more than 10 goblins were already on their way, arriving within 5 minutes. Hearing this, Niels suggested they take down all but one, then follow the survivor back to its den to wipe them out at once. They ventured deeper where Rio used his icebind technique to free several goblins, letting the others finish them with swords. As planned, they spared one and allowed it to escape. It led them to a cave mouth with a large gathering. On arrival, Rio cast icebind again, and the others cut down the frozen creatures with ease. Just when they thought the fight over, a massive goblin general stepped from the shadows with a crushing aura. Ammon and Niels immediately recognized it as the same type fought during the Great Tidal Boar. Convinced they stood no chance, they braced for defeat. But at that moment, Rio summoned ice chains that wrapped around the goblin general, dragging it into the ground and restraining it completely. All that remained was for Niels to deliver the finishing blow. On the way back, Rio told Niels he was relieved they won without casualties, and the best part was securing the goblin general's magic stone. Niels nodded. When they returned, the elder, Mistress Nezu, praised them for defeating the goblins. She said they must be tired, but their next task was to face the guardian beast. However, she warned there was a chance it might be corrupted, in which case they would have no choice but to fight. Rio realized this meant he might actually battle a guardian beast and again drifted into fantasies. Just as Nezu left, Ido noticed a strange item attached to her staff and quietly wondered what it could be. As they ventured deeper, Ido's curiosity got the better of him, so he asked if the charm was a crest of the Earth Mother Goddess. Nezu confirmed and praised Ido, saying he must be a well-learned priest to recognize it. Rio had no idea who the Earth Mother Goddess was. Ido explained long ago, the Goddess of Light and Earth Mother Goddess were part of a pantheon of 7, but as time passed, people assumed all priests only worshipped the Goddess of Light, causing the other 6 to fade into obscurity. Hearing this, Rio asked if that meant Nezu couldn't use elemental light healing magic. She replied she could indeed use healing magic, but it was different from temple priests. Since she served the Earth Mother Goddess, she didn't even need incantations like most priests. Before long, they arrived at the guardian beast's den. Nezu called out, announcing she brought people for the hunting request. Rio couldn't hide excitement, secretly hoping it was corrupted so he could fight. But when the guardian emerged, it was a massive blue wolf that greeted Nezu like an old acquaintance. Rio was instantly disappointed. The guardian beast barely acknowledged others, but when it looked at Rio, it took interest and introduced itself as Incuzi, asking for Rio's name. Nezu and Bulan were stunned because never in history had a guardian beast casually revealed its name. Incuzi explained he never shared it before since humans struggled to pronounce it, but meeting a water magician made him feel it would be rude not to. The guardian beast went on to explain he had some relation to fairy folk, and simply being near Rio made him feel at ease. Rio recalled Syrah once mentioned the fairy king liked him and wondered if he had a hidden trait appealing to fairies. He thanked Incuzi for kind words, but Incuzi insisted he should be grateful. Meeting Rio made him feel as though he would live 1,000 years longer, though in truth he only had a few decades left. With that aside, the guardian got serious and explained hunt details, about 30 skeletons inside the shrine, but one particularly powerful skeleton was also sealed there. Since the shrine alone wasn't strong enough, he had been containing it himself. Once they cleared others, he would release that one for them to fight. A couple minutes later, Ido used priest magic to defeat the last lesser skeleton. The group stood before the shrine, ready to face the stronger foe. They opened it and were shocked to see an arch-skeleton emerge. Rio quickly created ice hammers for each, explaining he would restrain it while they used hammers to wear it down. He signaled Incuzi, who released the arch-skeleton. It charged with incredible speed, but Rio instantly created a super slippery ice floor, causing it to slip and fall, giving Niels the opening to land a crushing blow to the back of its neck, finishing it. After victory, they entered the shrine when Nezu noticed part of the shrine's jewel was missing. She wasn't too surprised since the former village priest once told the story. The jewel had once shone brightly but turned dark and cloudy. The guardian had mentioned his cave received a strong energy flow from somewhere else, and she suspected the shrine was the source. She also considered repeated goblin attacks. Hearing this, Rio widened his eyes, wondering if this was connected to how Niels's parents died. Nezu continued, explaining despite all goblin raids, the village never located their true hideout, yet Niels's party managed to find it right away. She suspected the goblin cave drew power from the shrine, allowing it to spawn goblins endlessly. To solve the issue, Nezu declared she would use sorcery to collapse the cave entirely, preventing more spawning. The next day, Rio and his party prepared to leave and bid farewell. On the road, Niels told Rio and Ammon once he and Ido moved out, they would need to buy or rent a house. He asked if they would like to live together. Ammon eagerly agreed, but Rio said he needed time to think since there were things to consider. Meanwhile at the guild, Hugh asked Abel to cover for him at the Whitnash Open Port Festival. Normally he would have asked Phelps, but Phelps was busy. Abel sighed but agreed to help just once. In the following scene, 2 magician soldiers were locked in a fierce sparring match, suddenly interrupted when a lieutenant fired a fireball into the air, forcing them to stop. The lieutenant grew angry and shot a fire arrow that nearly hit one soldier. he yelled, warning they must never lower guard even when a fight appeared over, then announced the commander had come with important news. The commander stepped forward, commending their performance but declared she brought orders directly from the Imperial Majesty. She and the lieutenant would depart for Whitnash the next day, gone about 2 months. Before leaving, she told them she expected greater improvement upon return. As they walked away, the commander remarked the lieutenant must be in a good mood. Last time a soldier let guard down, he shot him through the leg. She believed the sight of his flame arrows was enough to keep discipline since he was the infamous Inferno magician. Meanwhile, Rio and the others traveled through a valley. At a certain point, they stopped to rest where Niels suggested the party name Room 10. Rio questioned it, saying it didn't sound right, but Niels insisted it represented them best. They had their first mission, and although never doing escort work before, with Rio around they could handle anything. Ammon was glad they covered this in the beginner adventure course. Rio considered they still had about 9 days until departure, finding that quite long. Niels explained it was arranged to coincide with the Whitnash Open Port Festival every 5 years. Rio got excited at hearing festival, knowing that meant a lot of food. That said, they continued until arriving at the next town later that evening. The noble they escorted made accommodations for the next 10 days, after which they would continue to Lon. The noble expressed gratitude, saying he felt safe in their care. That aside, they raced over to food stalls, considering how hungry they were. On reaching there, Rio stuffed his face, thinking this was the best fish and chips he'd ever had. The others agreed, believing it the best meal in a while. Meanwhile, the lieutenant traveled by carriage but seemed stuck in traffic. One of his men came to report a carriage from the monarchy of Kufaris ahead had issues with papers, and they were stuck in line because of that. The lieutenant wasn't upset, he knew there was nothing they could do, so he simply kept arms folded, waiting. The soldier entered, asking how he viewed this excursion. The lieutenant replied it was hard to say, but he was not about to speculate on the Imperial Majesty's intent. However, he doubted His Majesty just wanted them to check out the sea since the Empire was landlocked. After a few moments, the lieutenant opened up, saying there was a chance His Majesty intended to take care of some bloody business while Princess Fiona was gone. The soldier shuddered. The lieutenant told him he shouldn't be surprised because it was obvious with the way His Majesty doted on her. The soldier admitted Princess Fiona had magic talent and dedication, becoming a commander in the court's magic division at only 17, not to mention being very beautiful. The lieutenant explained His Majesty loved the princess both as his youngest daughter and most valuable asset, but that fondness might make him overlook more grotesque sides of his rule. Curious, the soldier asked what that could be, and the lieutenant replied it might be a purge of nobles opposing the imperial family, though this was just an assumption. All in all, guarding the commander was part of his duties. Later that night, an event for royals and nobles was held in a large banquet hall, but all eyes were on Prince Conrad, Fiona's elder brother. Conrad walked up to Fiona and apologized for dragging her into coming, even though she wasn't accustomed to fancy meetings. Fiona didn't mind and told him not to worry. That aside, Conrad said he would leave her to handle things on her end, patted her shoulder, and walked away to converse with an associate. Later, Fiona collapsed onto her bed. Relieved, Conrad said she didn't have to be there, she was truly not cut out for fancy stuff. Marie, a servant, loosened her gown as Fiona admitted she was more comfortable in the commander's office or training yard. She didn't know how her brother managed, constantly dealing with guests while looking out for her, even though he was just 3 years older. Marie responded by reminding Fiona she had great talent with sword and magic. Hearing that, Fiona smiled, realizing her charms lay in gifts for sword and spell. The day of the festival quickly arrived. As Rio and the others stood in the crowd, Rio spotted Abel sitting in seats reserved for special guests with Princess Fiona. Niels admitted to himself Fiona was beautiful, but Ido urged him not to get hopes up because she was way out of his league. Just then, Ria and Lin ran into Rio and the guys. Seeing them, Rio realized since Ria and Lin were here, the guy sitting with Princess Fiona definitely had to be Abel. Ria explained he was sitting there because Hugh asked him to stand in at the last second. That aside, Lin noticed a wind elemental shield protecting all VIP seats, incredibly thick. Ido was shocked to realize it was not just a regular wind barrier. Lin added she heard of a treasure passed down through the Lord of Whitnash's family that could project such a barrier. Ido admitted it sounded convenient, but Lin explained it was usually not very efficient, so they didn't often use it. Ria noted any terrorism where the imperial family was present could lead to war, so excessive fuel costs might be justified. Ammon and Rio admitted it was a scary thought, hoping nothing like that happened. That aside, Lin figured since Fiona was here, her lieutenant must be too. Rio didn't know who the lieutenant was, so Lin explained he was the pride of the Empire, widely known as the Inferno magician, earning that name from a rumor he incinerated 1,000 royal troops in a single attack, with several other feats securing that reputation. Rio advised the group not to have dealings with him because it could be dangerous, and Rio quickly agreed. With that, they decided to enjoy the rest. However, as Rio walked away, he accidentally bumped into the lieutenant. They both apologized, and Rio left without realizing who he encountered. After that, the lieutenant strolled through the festival with a soldier. The soldier reminded him he suggested splitting up to look for good food, yet he didn't buy a single thing. The lieutenant replied simply he didn't like crowds. The soldier told him that wasn't a good excuse because if he showed up empty-handed, Fiona would get upset and whine. The soldier noted they already got some items, so he suggested splitting again to gather the rest Fiona wanted. The lieutenant sighed in defeat. He really hated this part, but there was nothing he could do. Later, Abel met with Prince Conrad and spoke about Princess Fiona, whom he saw in guest seats. Curious, Conrad asked if something about her caught his attention since she was there. He wished to confirm if Lieutenant Baron Oscar Lusker was also present. However, Conrad explained such matters fell under military affairs and he couldn't discuss them, then changed subject, saying he had someone else to talk to before walking away. After this, Abel felt anxious, admitting he was terrible at confrontations. Meanwhile, Fiona collapsed onto her bed, exhausted again. Marie advised her to act more properly, but Fiona admitted it was hard to play the role of a princess. Just then, Oscar walked in, saying how exhausted he was and that he didn't like crowds. One soldier pointed out he kept running into that one boy, but Oscar replied they kept avoiding each other because he was quick to react. Fiona was surprised he was that quick, but Oscar warned not to be fooled. The boy might dress like a magician but definitely knew how to move. For now, they decided to eat. Meanwhile at the festival, an archery competition took place with locals gathered. Ammon kicked things off but failed miserably. Next was Ido, who also missed. Rio asked if Neil signed up, but Niels confidently explained he hadn't because he never touched a bow and arrow. During this, Abel laughed when seeing Ido's failed attempts. Rio scolded him, saying it wasn't nice to laugh, but Abel clarified he wasn't directly laughing at Ido, it was just that seeing Ido's form reminded him of how he used to be. When it was Abel's turn, Rio pushed him out, asking him to show real archery. Abel resisted, reminding Rio he was a swordsman, but Rio insisted it didn't matter. As Abel stepped up, he grew nervous but calmed himself, drew his bow, and landed a bullseye. The crowd cheered. This good moment didn't last long, however, as Abel soon ran into Ria, who had a strange smile. He noticed she bought many things and asked what they were for. Ria replied they were a woman's necessities. Lin explained to Rio and Ammon Abel promised to go around with Ria today but didn't show up, so she was now angry. After that, Ria walked away with Abel, holding him firmly by the arm. Niels and the others simply stared, acknowledging Abel really was something else. Meanwhile, Sira visited the Adventurers Guild and happened to see Nina, who was surprised. They exchanged pleasantries. Sira explained she was looking for Rio because she had a lead on something he searched for in the library, but Nina informed her Rio was out of town. Sira accepted, saying she would check back tomorrow and began to walk away. However, Nina called her back, telling her Rio accepted an extended job and wouldn't be back for a while. Sira froze in shock, asked how long, and after hearing about another week, slowly walked off in a frozen state, saying goodbye. Meanwhile at the festival, it was time for the boat race. Niels was participating, so Rio and Ido looked down and saw him in a heated argument with Dan, an opponent. Rio's attention shifted to a blue-haired girl who appeared worried. Ido explained she was Sasha, a priest like him but on the Room 2 team. Shortly after, the race began with Oscar and Fiona watching from above. Fiona wondered why there was a separate race for adventurers, and Marie explained it was because adventurers were allowed to attack each other in the back half. Another soldier added banning magic put a twist, but Oscar disagreed, saying if magic were allowed, the race would quickly be decided by whoever was strongest. That aside, Fiona mentioned she enjoyed the creep and suggested having them on training grounds. Oscar immediately disagreed, saying training grounds were for training, not sweets. Meanwhile, the race grew intense. Niels and Dan were locked in a brutal fight on boats, using extra paddles as weapons, but after those broke, they took paddles from people steering and continued, causing boats to stop, guaranteeing both would lose. Eventually, boats tipped over, sending everyone crashing into water. Despite this, an award was given for entertaining the crowd most, though they immediately fought over it. After that, Hugh walked over as they admired a beautiful ship known as the Rain Shooter. Ammon asked how it worked, so Hugh explained through a combination of magic stones and alchemy, wind magic propelled it into air while water magic pushed below. Niels was too dumb to understand, so he simply admitted it sounded cool. Later, they headed to a crossbow shop. Ido looked to buy one because he thought of ways to contribute more effectively. While Ammon and Niels held front lines, Ido greeted the merchant and explained he wanted something for covering fire from mid-range. The merchant provided a repeating crossbow. While not best range, it allowed firing arrows in quick succession. This was exactly what Ido searched for, so he agreed to buy. After the festival, two unknown figures discussed plans regarding Hugh, but since Abel stood in his place, they decided to carry out their attack on him instead, and that night would be the prime moment. Later that night at the garden party, Conrad was surprised to see Abel again acting in Hugh's stead. Abel explained Hugh was exhausted by the end of the day and returned home. Just then, Fiona walked in, and Conrad introduced her to Abel. Fiona bowed politely, saying it was nice to meet him, and they exchanged pleasantries before walking away. Abel sighed, feeling incomplete without a sword, but reassured himself with the protective barrier above, he likely wouldn't need it. Now in the control room, something was off. The treasure didn't appear to be channeling mana anymore, meaning the barrier was about to collapse. Shortly after, it went down, and guards were attacked from behind. The party had been infiltrated and was under attack. The story shifted to Oscar's childhood, where he was a little boy helping his master forge a sword. Oscar hammered with excitement and praised his master, amazed he worked half a day without signs of being tired. His master simply replied making something of true quality required patience, persistence, and hard work. After finishing, Oscar headed to meet his father, Sna, chopping firewood nearby. Oscar happily told him he was back from helping. Sna smiled, welcomed him, and told him to go inside and help his mother with dinner. Oscar did as told, went inside, greeted his mother, and she asked him to help start the fire. Oscar took firewood, used a bit of flame magic to ignite it, making his mother proud. The next day, the blacksmith finished a few swords. Just then, Sna walked in to check and asked if Oscar caused trouble. The blacksmith assured it was the opposite. Thanks to Oscar's magic, forging became smoother and faster. Hearing this, Sna was pleased and patted Oscar's head. The blacksmith then lifted one sword and told Sna he forged it especially for Oscar, since he was turning 7, about time to take sword training seriously. The blacksmith explained it was made lighter than an adult's blade so Oscar could handle it better. Sna agreed, and Oscar thanked his master. From that point, Oscar started accompanying hunters, training his eye and learning their ways. One day, he successfully took down a wild boar. Everyone was impressed to see someone so young achieve such a thing. Filled with confidence, Oscar remarked he would have preferred to face it with his sword rather than an arrow, since his master made a blade just for him. That night, villagers held a feast celebrating Oscar's first boar hunt. But while it went on, Sna met with a villager in a secluded spot. The man informed him bandits had been spotted scouting around the village. Worse, reports said they were more than 50 and planned to attack within next few days. Hearing this grim news, Isene realized the village had no time to flee, no safe place to hide, and their only choice would be to stand and fight. A couple days later, villagers were fully prepared. Everyone was armed when bandits finally made their move. After villagers launched a successful counterattack, Isene turned to Oscar and told him to leave the battlefield at once and meet up with his mother while he stayed to continue. Oscar looked with worry, but Isene reassured him not to be afraid since he had one of the swords crafted by the blacksmith. Villagers remained alert, but then disaster struck. One bandit broke through far side defenses, cutting down the entire front line, forced gates open, allowing the rest to flood inside. The same bandit stormed toward Oscar's home, eyes filled with murderous intent. Oscar's mother bravely tried to protect her son, thrusting her spear, but the bandit caught it effortlessly, then slashed her down in a single strike. Oscar stood frozen as his mother collapsed lifeless. Fueled by rage, Oscar unleashed fire magic, but the bandit blocked without trouble. Desperate, Oscar charged with his sword, but strikes failed to land. The bandit raised his blade to finish Oscar when Isene suddenly burst in to shield his son. His eyes fell upon his wife's body, and fury overtook him. He attacked with everything, but the man evaded every strike with ease. The bandit lured Isene outside where hidden archers waited. They fired, striking Isene with arrows, and in the next moment, the bandit drove his sword through Isene's chest. Oscar's father collapsed, leaving him defenseless again. Before the bandit could kill Oscar, a comrade shouted, warning wolves were approaching, drawn by the thick smell of blood. Reluctantly, bandits withdrew, not wanting to risk a fight with beasts. Moments later, the blacksmith rushed inside, his heart sank seeing Oscar's parents dead. He hurried to the boy, urging him to leave before wolves arrived, but Oscar was overwhelmed by grief, crying uncontrollably, saying he wanted to die alongside his parents. The blacksmith knelt and told Oscar never to say such a thing. His parents would have wanted him to live, carry on, and survive. Howls echoed. The blacksmith quickly instructed Oscar to run to the river since wolves hated water. Oscar hesitated but obeyed, watching his master hold wolves at bay. He ran with all strength, but two wolves broke away and chased. Just as they closed in, Oscar dived into the river, swept away by the rushing current. Wolves stopped at the edge, unwilling to get fur wet, and gave up. By the next morning, Oscar awakened in a soft bed, disoriented. Sitting beside him was a nobleman named Luke, who greeted warmly, asking how he felt, and explained a villager found him washed up at the river's edge. At the memory of everything lost, Oscar broke down, sobbing. As Luke watched, he noticed Oscar's striking red hair, blazing crimson locks said in legend to be the mark of the fire god's affection. Old stories claimed being born with such hair was proof of carrying the fire god's blessing. Seeing it made Luke pause, feeling as though fate brought this boy into his care. Oscar then told Luke honestly he had nowhere else to go and asked if he could stay at the manor. Luke had no objections but made clear if Oscar lived under his roof, he must receive proper education, beginning as soon as he recovered. Oscar nodded but also made a request. He wanted to undergo sword training. After all endured, Oscar was determined to become stronger to protect himself and those he loved. He believed here his dream of becoming a true swordsman would begin. But that dream was cruelly shattered a few years later. One night, bandits attacked the manor, setting everything ablaze. Oscar saw Luke stabbed before his eyes. Enraged, he drew his sword and charged, managing to slash the bandit across the face, but his strike only enraged the man. The bandit seized Oscar by the hair and drove a blade straight through his chest, then tossed him aside to die. As Oscar lay bleeding, he looked up and realized in horror this was the same bandit who raided his village years ago, the very man who murdered his parents. Moments later, bandits retreated after hearing knights approach, but Oscar refused to give in. Wounded, he was later seen stumbling through the forest. The trauma and strain turned his hair white. Still, he pushed onward, hoping to find a village, refusing to let his story end. Back in the present, the scene shifted to Abel meeting a nobleman. The man explained the meeting was about the introductory course for adventurers taking place in Lon. He proposed implementing something similar in Whitnash. Abel listened and admitted it was an excellent idea. He heard the survival rate of rookies greatly improved because of this program. The nobleman agreed, saying he and Hugh discussed securing access to Lon's training materials and choosing an instructor. With points covered, Abel asked if anything else to address. The nobleman added one more suggestion, sending prospective instructors to participate in Lon's course firsthand. He believed it valuable for them to experience training directly to better understand how to teach. He humbly asked for Abel's support, ensuring this first step was successful. Meanwhile, at the festival, Oscar was seen with subordinates. They looked curiously, wondering why he wasn't devouring all the food on display. Oscar replied he waited for Fiona to arrive before eating. On top of that, he thought it easier to move quickly on an empty stomach. The officers doubted any real danger, pointing out the venue was guarded by windshield magic, considered the strongest barrier. But Oscar refused to rely solely on that protection, and just as he feared, disaster struck. The venue came under attack with fireballs raining from the sky. Fiona immediately wondered who would dare launch such an assault. In chaos, she found Conrad lying wounded after being caught in a blast. She quickly cast a barrier and began using magic to heal him, but Conrad insisted she shouldn't waste too much mana, she would need it when the real fight began. Fiona scanned for a safe place and spotted a gazebo nearby, asking if Conrad could make it there. He assured he could, so she helped him over. Once there, Conrad explained it was likely attackers sealed off the entire venue. No one had been able to leave except intruders. He recalled Fiona's knights came with her and asked if she could contact them. Fiona hesitated, saying doing so would reveal their location, but Conrad responded firmly it didn't matter, they were already at a complete disadvantage. Reluctantly, Fiona raised her hand and sent a magical flare into the sky. Oscar and others spotted it immediately, realized it was an emergency, and rushed toward the venue. Rio also noticed the flare and wondered what was happening. But just as Conrad predicted, the flare gave away their position. Bandit saw it and quickly turned attention, preparing to attack. Seeing this, Conrad realized they had no choice but to fight. He turned to Fiona and told her not to hold back, not to take prisoners, but to kill every single attacker. Fiona nodded. Conrad struck first, hurling a stone javelin that crashed into enemy and took several down. Fiona followed, loosing flaming arrows that struck true, cutting down the rest. But before they could catch breath, another bandit stepped forward at a distance and unleashed bullet rain. Countless magical projectiles streaked through air. Fiona reacted instantly, raising hands and activating Sanctuary Square, forming a shining barrier around herself and Conrad to withstand the storm. Meanwhile, Oscar and guards arrived to find the entire place burned down and destroyed. With the state, guards began to wonder if Fiona had died, but Oscar urged them not to say such things. There was no way she would die so easily. He ordered guards to split up and search. At the same time, Conrad heard an incantation but couldn't figure where it came from. At the last second, Fiona realized it was an earth and explosions technique. She pushed Conrad out of the way just as ground erupted with fire and a volcano burst forth. Fiona got caught in the blast, thrown high into air. Oscar watched from a distance and saw Fiona flying, plummeting to her doom. In that moment, memories of loved ones dying flashed before his eyes. He refused to let it happen a third time, so he rushed to save her, shouting for guards to protect Conrad. Meanwhile, Niels and others argued about creps while chaos unfolded. When they saw the giant volcanic eruption, they assumed at first it was fireworks until Niels noticed Princess Fiona being hurled out and falling. He dashed to her landing point and caught her just before she hit. Holding her, he sighed in relief, saying that was close. Just then, some bandits chasing the princess arrived, but Ammon and Edo quickly took them down with magic and combat skills. From this, they all realized something terrible must be happening nearby. Moments later, Oscar arrived and saw Fiona in Niels's arms. Mistaking them for enemies, Oscar glared with a furious expression and demanded they get away from Fiona immediately. Oscar immediately jumped into action and hurled a fire attack, but Edo blocked it with his sanctuary barrier. Right after, he collapsed because backlash from using the sanctuary ability was too much. Oscar kept demanding they release Fiona, but they refused. Oscar fired another burst of flames, and even though his body was weakened, Edo forced himself to raise another sanctuary barrier. This time, However, the attack smashed through and burned them all, sending everyone collapsing. Ammon was the only one left standing. Even though he knew he had no chance, he still drew his sword because he wasn't the kind of man who ran from a fight. Oscar fired his next attack, expecting to end Ammon instantly, but to his shock, an ice barrier suddenly appeared and blocked the flames. Rio then stepped forward, and his eyes widened in disbelief seeing how badly wounded his friends were. He demanded to know what Oscar had done, but Oscar only snapped, telling Rio to shut up and stay away from Fiona. Oscar immediately sent another attack, but Rio blocked with an ice lance. Oscar was stunned. Rio actually had strength to stop it, so he shifted attention and decided to kill Rio first. Oscar launched multiple waves of fire attacks, but Rio blocked every one by switching between different ice techniques. Oscar could hardly believe what he was seeing. Rio countered all without breaking a sweat. With cold eyes, Rio asked if that was really all he had. It was Rio's turn. He rained ice lances down, but Oscar managed to block them all. Just as the second round was about to begin, Abel arrived and shouted to stop immediately. Rio glared sideways and warned Abel not to interfere because he wouldn't hesitate to freeze him. Abel gulped but tried to explain to Oscar the 4 people he fought were adventurers from Lon's guild, not the kind who would join the raid. Even after hearing this, Rio thanked Abel for clearing things up but declared Oscar must die for what he did because there must be a price to pay. Hearing that, Oscar erupted into a berserk state and began raining fireballs down. But without effort, Rio used sharp jets of water to destroy them before they could reach. Rio calmly complimented Oscar, saying it was impressive for a human and he did his best, but his best was nowhere near enough. This time, right when Rio was about to finish, Abel yelled again and begged him to stop because this fight was an international incident and if it continued, it could cause war. Abel walked closer and pleaded with him to put his sword away. Rio asked if Abel would step aside if someone like Oscar hurt Rio. Without hesitation, Abel answered he would absolutely stand down because he knew she would never want war to break out. But even after hearing, Rio remained unconvinced. He suddenly fired an ice attack at Abel. To his complete shock, Abel didn't move to block or dodge. Instead, he stood his ground and let ice brush against him without resistance. Rio was left shocked, wondering why. Abel said the reason he didn't dodge was because he refused to allow war to ignite with him being the cause. He was fully prepared to give his life if that would stop it. Hearing that, Rio responded out of respect for Abel's resolve. He was willing to withdraw. So now while Abel rushed to reach the princess, Rio quietly walked off, and after a few steps, turned back with relief in his eyes, glad he protected his friends. The next morning, Niels and others were back in good shape because Rio used healing magic to restore them. Rio was happy to see they were doing better. But right at that moment, Abel walked in looking more tired than usual. Abel explained he looked drained because he had so much to deal with after the huge mess Rio created with Oscar the night before. The others quickly asked if there would be repercussions. Abel reassured them not to worry since there wasn't going to be a problem. He already explained everything clearly to the prince and princess when they woke up, and they understood. To their shock, Oscar even offered an apology, so now everything was treated as a simple misunderstanding. Niels and the rest were delighted because they worried their licenses might get taken away. Rio was surprised Oscar apologized and took responsibility. Abel went on to say things turned out well, but the garden party still suffered a large number of casualties, meaning there would definitely be complicated diplomatic consequences later. After hearing, Rio assumed all blame would fall on Abel since he was there but didn't do anything. However, Abel explained it wasn't his fault because he had been busy handling guild business in a separate building, and by the time he got back, the whole disaster had unfolded. Putting that aside, Abel mentioned Princess Fiona wanted to personally extend gratitude to Niels's group because they saved her from crashing and risked their lives protecting her from raiders. She offered a huge cash reward. But unfortunately, there was nothing for Rio since all he did was pick a fight with Oscar for no proper reason. Rio simply replied he didn't care anyway. After this, they walked through town and realized the festival was over, meaning their escort mission was officially complete. However, Rio stopped them to remind a mission wasn't truly finished until they returned home safely, so he suggested they all head back to Lon. The next day in Lon, Syrah thought deeply about when Rio would return. She felt concerned why she became so obsessed, especially since she didn't even know he existed just a month ago. As she walked into a local building, she suddenly froze in shock seeing Rio already sitting there. She blushed instantly, realizing this was the moment she waited for. Rio turned, noticed her, and waved. Syrah quickly walked over with a bright smile and sat beside him as they happily caught up. After about half an hour, Syrah took Rio to the library, saying there was something important she meant to show him. She led him into a restricted section normally accessible only to B-rank adventurers, but she secured special permission. Once there, she revealed a collection of documents containing detailed records about advanced alchemy. Rio looked over and admitted information written was truly groundbreaking. He realized Syrah must have been waiting to share this discovery for quite some time, so he apologized for not being around earlier. Syrah confirmed but told him not to worry. With that said, Rio pulled out a sheet and prepared to take notes, but Syrah quickly told him there was no point writing manually when he could use the transcribe skill instead, a special ability allowing the user to instantly copy any text on paper. Syrah found it ironic because even though Rio was incredibly strong, he was still clueless about basic spells. Shortly after, Rio finished copying, and the task was done. That aside, Rio brought up something he was curious about. Since Syrah spent so much time here, shouldn't entrance fees add up quickly? But Syrah explained because she worked directly for the Lord, they waived the fee. Hearing that, Rio told her she was lucky. Syrah got a little embarrassed, admitting she used to pay in the beginning, but once the Lord realized 90% of admissions were just her, he found that unreasonable and decided to waive it. On top of that, he gave her access to this special archive since normally you couldn't get in without a proper chaperone. Putting that aside, Syrah told Rio she wanted to take him to a transcriber so he could see the spell in practice. Rio happily agreed because he worried his magic knowledge was too narrow and specialized. Syrah admitted she also wasn't very knowledgeable about human magic, and since it had been a long time since she left the forest, a change of environment might be good. Hearing that, Rio suddenly wondered how old she actually was and shuddered when she calmly said she was 200. Syrah told him not to be so surprised, but Rio admitted he was shocked because she still looked beautiful after 2 centuries. Syrah blushed deeply. Not long after, they arrived at the transcriber's building but ran into Abel, who greeted quickly before walking off since he was in a hurry. However, just before leaving, Rio called him back and said he wanted a word later, so he asked if Abel could drop by. With a smile, Abel agreed and continued. After he left, Syrah told Rio she wanted him to speak to her just as casually as he did with Abel. Rio didn't mind, so he agreed, saying they were friends now. Later that day at a diner, Abel arrived to meet Rio, apologizing for being late and asking what was urgent. Rio reminded him he still owed something and hoped he was finally going to pay up. Abel looked confused, so Rio reminded him he promised to treat him to dinner for an entire week. Abel admitted he was too broke, so he chuckled awkwardly. Rio said he already expected this, so instead, he asked for something else to make up. He explained since Niels's party was leaving dorms to move in together, he would like to try living on his own. He had many experiments planned with magic and alchemy, so he needed a large house with plenty of space outside. That's why he hoped Abel could help find the kind of property. Abel said it was no problem and he would be glad to help. Rio added he actually had a decent budget from selling the Wyvern stone. He was looking for something like an old-fashioned noble's house or a creepy haunted house. But when Abel heard this, he couldn't understand where Rio came up with such strange ideas. Later that day, Abel took Rio to real estate agent Mr. Ripley to inquire, but unfortunately, the agent said they couldn't sell noble property to someone of lowly status like Rio, crushing his dream. So they just asked for a regular house with a large yard. Mr. Ripley searched and found a property suiting requirements, but the only problem was it was outside town. Rio said he didn't mind, so they went for an inspection. It was an old farmhouse kept in pristine condition. After surveying, Mr. Ripley said it would cost 50 million florins, but Rio immediately declared he would buy it. This only marked a new beginning. Meanwhile in heaven, Michael watched everything unfold in Rio's life and saw the conflict with the Inferno magician Oscar would be quite significant. The life ahead was going to be complicated. It was rare for people to end up in such situations just because they were reincarnated. A peaceful life was going to be the furthest thing from him, but considering how far he had gotten, Michael believed he would be just fine. This is where the video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.